This is Audible.
Harper Audio presents Winning by Jack Welch with Susie Welch. Read by Jack Welch. Introduction. Every day there's a new question. After I finished my autobiography, a fun but crazily intense grind that I wedged into the corners of my real job at the time, I swore I'd never write another book again. But I guess I did. My excuse, if there is one, is that I didn't actually come up with the idea for this book. It was given to me. It was a retirement present, if you will, from the tens of thousands of terrific people I have met since I left GE. The energized, curious, gutsy, and ambitious men and women who have loved business enough to ask me every possible question you could imagine. In order to answer them, all I had to do was figure out what I knew, sort it out, codify it, and borrow their stories, and this book was off and running. The questions I'm referring to first started during the promotional tour for my autobiography in late 2001 and through much of 2002, when I was overwhelmed by the emotional attachment people seemed to have for GE. From coast to coast and in many countries around the world, people told me touching stories about their experiences working for the company, or what happened when their sister, dad, aunt, or grandfather did. But with these stories, I was also surprised to hear how much more people wanted to know about getting business right. Radio call-in guests pressed me to explain GE's system of top 20, middle 70, and bottom 10, which separates employees into 3 performance categories and manages them up or out accordingly. People attending book signing events wanted to know if I really meant it when I said the head of human resources at every company should be at least as important as the CFO. And I did. At a visit to the University of Chicago Business School, an MBA from India asked me to explain more fully what a really good performance appraisal should look like. The questions didn't stop after the book tour. They continued in airports, restaurants, and elevators. Once a guy swam over to me in the surf off Miami Beach to ask me what I thought about a certain franchise opportunity he was considering. But mainly, they've come at the 150 or so Q&A sessions I've participated in over the past 3 years, in cities around the world, from New York to Shanghai, from Milan to Mexico City. In these sessions, which have ranged from 30 to 5,000 audience members, I sit on a stage with a moderator, usually a business journalist, and I try to answer anything the audience wants to throw at me. And throw they have. Questions about everything from coping with Chinese competition, to managing talented but difficult people, to finding the perfect job, to implementing Six Sigma, to hiring the right team, to leading in uncertain times, to surviving mergers and acquisitions, to devising a killer strategy. What should I do, I've heard, if I deliver great results, but I work for a jerk who doesn't seem to care, or if I'm the only person in my company who thinks change is necessary, or if the budget process in my company is full of sandbagging, or I'm about to launch a great new product and headquarters doesn't want to give me the autonomy and resources I need. What can I do, people have asked, if managers in my company don't really tell it like it is, or I have to let go of an employee I really like, but who just can't hack it, or I have to lead my organization through the crisis we've been trying to deal with for a year. There have been questions about juggling the colliding demands of kids, career, and all that other stuff you want to do, like play golf, renovate your house, or raise money in a walkathon. There have been questions about landing the promotion of your dreams without making any enemies. There have been questions about macroeconomic trends, emerging industries, and currency fluctuations. There have been literally thousands of questions, but most of them come down to this: what does it take to win? And that is what this book is about: winning. Probably no other topic could have made me want to write again, because I think winning is great. Not good, great. Winning in business is great because when companies win, people thrive and grow. There are more jobs and more opportunities everywhere and for everyone. People feel upbeat about the future. They have the resources to send their kids to college, get better health care, buy vacation homes, and secure a comfortable retirement. And winning affords them the opportunity to give back to society in hugely important ways beyond just paying more taxes. They can donate time and money to charities and mentor in inner-city schools, to name just two. Winning lifts everyone it touches. It just makes the world a better place. When companies are losing, on the other hand, everyone takes a hit. People feel scared. They have less financial security and limited time or money to do anything for anyone else. All they do is worry and upset their families. In the meantime, if they're out of work, they pay little, if any, taxes. Let's talk about taxes for a minute. In fact, let's talk about government in general. Obviously, government is a vital part of society. First and foremost, it does nothing less than protect us all from the insidious and persistent challenges to national security that are with us now and for the foreseeable future. But government provides much more. The justice system, education, police and fire protection, highways and ports, welfare and hospitals. The list could go on and on. But even with the virtues of government, it's critical to remember that all of its services come from some form of tax revenue. Government makes no money of its own. And in that way, government is the support for the engine of the economy. It is not the engine itself. Winning companies and the people who work for them are the engine of a healthy economy. And in providing the revenues for government, they are the foundation of a free and democratic society. That's why winning is great. Now, it goes without saying that you have to win the right way, cleanly and by the rules. That's a given. Companies and people that don't compete fairly don't deserve to win. And thanks to well-honed internal company processes and government regulatory agencies, the bad guys are usually found and kicked out of the game. But companies and people in business that are honest, and that's the vast, vast majority, must find the way to win. This book offers a roadmap. It is not, incidentally, a roadmap just for senior-level managers and CEOs. If this book helps them, terrific. I hope it does. But this book is also very much for people on the front lines. Business owners, middle managers, people running factories, line workers, college graduates looking at their first jobs, MBAs considering new careers, and entrepreneurs. My main goal with this book is to help the people with ambition in their eyes and passion running through their veins, wherever they are in an organization. You will meet a lot of people in this book. Some may remind you of yourself. Some may just feel very familiar. There's the CEO, who presents the company with a list of noble values, say quality, customer service, and respect, but never really explains what it means to live them. There's the middle manager, who fumes during a meeting with another division of his company, knowing that his co-workers could do so much more if they just stopped patting themselves on the back for a minute. There is the employee who has been underperforming for years, but is just so friendly and nice and clueless, you can't bring yourself to let her go. There is the colleague you can't look in the eye because he's a dead man walking, slowly and painfully being managed out the door. There are the employees who eat lunch every day at what they have dubbed the table of lost dreams, making a show of their resentment of authority. There's the engineer who spent 15 years building a great career, only to throw it in one day when she realized that she had juggled life and work to make everyone happy but herself. You'll also meet a lot of people whose stories are examples of innovation, insight, and grit. There's David Novak, the energetic young CEO of Yum Brands, who has turned every one of Yum's more than 33,000 restaurant chain outlets into a laboratory of new ideas and the entire organization into a learning machine. There's Dennis Naden, the consummate change agent, who never settles for good enough and has intensity to burn. There's Jimmy Dunn, who rebuilt his company out of the ashes of the World Trade Center using love, hope, and an attitude that anything is possible. There's Susan Peters, a working mother and the number 2 HR executive at GE, who could write a book herself on successfully navigating the hills and valleys of work-life balance. There is Chris Navetta, the CEO of U.S. Steel Košice, who helped transform a struggling city in Slovakia while turning a former state-owned steel mill into a flourishing, profitable enterprise. There's Kenneth Yu, the head of 3M's Chinese operations, who catapulted his businesses from modest to high growth by throwing out the phony ritual of annual budgeting and replacing it with a sky's the limit dialogue about opportunities. There's Mark Little, who was devastated after a demotion at GE, but fought his way back to a huge promotion with courage, perseverance, and great results. People are everything when it comes to winning, and so this book is a lot about people. In some cases, the mistakes they've made, but more often their successes. But mostly this book is about ideas and the power of putting them into action. Now, at this point, there might be listeners out there who are skeptical. They're thinking, winning is just too nuanced and complex a topic to cover in 20 chapters. I don't care how many people and ideas are in this book. Yes, winning is nuanced and complex, not to mention brutally hard. But it also happens to be achievable. You can win, but to do that you need to know what makes winning happen. This book offers no easy formulas. There are none. Depending on the chapter, this book does, however, give you guidelines to follow, rules to consider, assumptions to adopt, and mistakes to avoid. The strategy chapter provides a 3-step process. The chapter on finding the right job offers you good signs and warning signals. There are also several themes you'll hear again and again. The team with the best players wins, so find and retain the best players. Don't overbrain things to the point of inaction. No matter what part of a business you're in, share learning relentlessly. Have a positive attitude and spread it around. Never let yourself be a victim. And for goodness sake, have fun. Yes, have fun. Business is a game, and winning that game is a total blast. The road ahead. Before we get started, a word on how this book is organized. It has 4 parts. The first, called Underneath It All, is conceptual. It certainly contains more management philosophy than most business people have time for on any given day, and certainly more than I ever thought about in one sitting when I was working the day shift. But there's a substructure of principles to my approach to business, and so I lay them out in this first part. In brief, the 4 principles are about the importance of a strong mission and concrete values, the absolute necessity of candor in every aspect of management, the power of differentiation, meaning a system based on meritocracy, and the value of each individual receiving voice and dignity. The next section of this book, Your Company, is about the innards of organizations. It's about mechanics, people, processes, and culture. Its chapters look at leadership, hiring, people management, letting people go, managing change, and crisis management. After Your Company comes Your Competition, the section of this book about the world outside your organization. It discusses how you create strategic advantages, devise meaningful budgets, grow organically, grow through mergers and acquisitions, and it attempts to demystify a topic that never ceases to intrigue and baffle people, the quality program, Six Sigma. The next section of this book is called Your Career, and it's about managing the arc and quality of your professional life. It starts with a chapter on finding the right job, not just a first job, but the right job at any point in your career. It also includes a chapter on what it takes to get promoted, and another on a hard spot we all find ourselves in at one time or another, working for a bad boss. The last chapter of this section addresses the very human desire to have it all at the same time, which, as you already know, you can't really do. You can, however, know what your boss thinks about the matter, and you should, and that's one aspect of this chapter. The last section of this book is called Tying Up Loose Ends, and in it I answer 9 questions that did not fall into any of the above categories. They concern managing the China threat, diversity, the impact of new regulations like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and how business should respond to societal crises like AIDS. There's also a question there about how my successor, Jeff Immelt, is doing. In a word, great. The status of my golf game, and whether or not I think I'll go to heaven. Now that was a question that stopped me. As for the rest of the questions in this book, they didn't exactly stop me, but they did challenge me to think hard about what I believe and why. This book has a lot of answers, but not all, because business is always changing and the world is always changing. As a Dutch entrepreneur said to me last year, every day in life there's a new question. That's what keeps us going. There are new questions and new answers too. In fact, I have learned almost as much about business since I left GE as when I worked there. I learned from every single question asked of me, and I hope my responses will help you learn too. Now we're going to get into the 4 chapters of Underneath It All, starting with number 1, Missions and Values. The subtitle of this chapter is So Much Hot Air About Something So Real. Bear with me, if you will, while I talk about mission and values. I say that because these 2 terms have got to be among the most abstract, overused, misunderstood words in business. When I speak with audiences, I'm frequently asked about them, usually with some level of panic over their actual meaning and relevance. In New York, I once got the question, can you please define the difference between a mission and a value, and also tell us what difference that difference makes? Business schools add to the confusion by having their students regularly write mission statements and debate values, a practice made even more futile for being carried out in a vacuum. Lots of companies do the same to their senior executives, usually in an attempt to create a noble-sounding plaque to hang in the company lobby. Too often, these exercises end with a set of generic platitudes that do nothing but leave employees directionless or cynical. Who doesn't know of a mission statement that reads something like, XYZ company values quality and service, or such and such company is customer-driven? Tell me what company doesn't value quality and service or focus on its customers? And who doesn't know of a company that has spent countless hours in emotional debate only to come up with values that, despite the good intentions that went into them, sound as if they were plucked from an all-purpose list of virtues, including integrity, quality, excellence, service, and respect? Give me a break. Every decent company espouses these things. And frankly, integrity is just a ticket to the game. If you don't have it in your bones, you shouldn't be allowed on the field. By contrast, a good mission statement and a good set of values are so real, they smack you in the face with their concreteness. The mission announces exactly where you are going, and the values describe the behaviors that will get you there. Speaking of that, I prefer abandoning the term values altogether in favor of just behaviors. But for the sake of tradition, Let's stick with the common terminology. First, then, about that mission. In my experience, an effective mission statement basically answers one question: how do we intend to win in this business? It does not answer, what were we good at in the old days? Nor does it answer, how can we describe our business so that no particular unit or division or senior executive gets pissed off? Instead, the question, how do we intend to win in this business, is defining. It requires companies to make choices about people, investments, and other resources, and it prevents them from falling into the common mission trap of asserting they will be all things to all people at all times. The question forces companies to delineate their strengths and weaknesses in order to assess where they can profitably play in the competitive landscape. Yes, profitably. That's the key. Even Ben & Jerry's, the crunchy granola, hippie save-the-world ice cream company based in Vermont, has profitable growth and increasing value for stakeholders as one of the elements of its three-part mission statement, because its executives know that without financial success, all the social goals in the world don't have a chance. That's not saying a mission statement shouldn't be bold or aspirational. Ben & Jerry's, for instance, wants to sell all natural ice cream and euphoric concoctions and improve the quality of life locally, nationally, and internationally. That kind of language is great in that it absolutely has the power to excite people and motivate them to stretch. At the end of the day, effective mission statements balance the possible and the impossible. They give people a clear sense of the direction to profitability and the inspiration to feel they are part of something big and important. Take our mission at GE as an example. From 1981 through 1995, we said we were going to be the most competitive enterprise in the world by being number one or number two in every market, fixing, selling, or closing every underperforming business that couldn't get there. There could be no doubt about what this mission meant or entailed. It was specific and descriptive, with nothing abstract going on. And it was aspirational, too, in its global ambition. This mission came to life in a bunch of different ways. First off, in a time when business strategy was mainly kept in an envelope in headquarters, and any information about it was the product of the company gossip mill, we talked openly about which businesses were already number one and number two, and which businesses had to get repaired quickly or be gone. Such candor shocked the system, but it did wonders for making the mission real to our people. They may have hated it when business was sold, but they understood why. Moreover, we harped on the mission constantly, at every meeting, large and small. Every decision or initiative was linked to the mission. We publicly rewarded people who drove the mission and let go of people who couldn't deal with it for whatever reason, usually nostalgia for their business in the good old days. Now, it is possible that in 1981 we could have come up with an entirely different mission for GE. Say, after lots of debate and an in-depth analysis of technology, competitors, and customers, we had decided we wanted to become the most innovative designer of electrical products in the world. Or say we had decided that our most profitable route would have been to quickly and thoroughly globalize every business we had, no matter what its market position. Either of these two missions would have sent GE off on an entirely different road from the one we took. They would have required us to buy and sell different business than we did, or hire and let go of different people, and so forth. But technically, I have no argument with them as missions. They are concrete and specific. Without doubt, the electrical products mission would have come as a comfort to most people in GE. After all, that's what most thought we were. The global focus mission would have probably alarmed others. Rapid change usually does. A final word about missions, and it concerns their creation. How do you come up with one? To me, this is a no-brainer. You can get input from anywhere, and you should listen to smart people from every quarter. But setting the mission is top management's responsibility. A mission cannot and must not be delegated to anyone except the people ultimately held accountable for it. In fact, a mission is the defining moment for a company's leadership. It's the true test of its stuff. And now about those values. As I said earlier, values are just behaviors, specific, nitty-gritty, and so descriptive they leave little to the imagination. People must be able to use them as marching orders because they are the how of the mission, the means to the end, winning. In contrast to the creation of a mission, everyone in the company should have something to say about values. Yes, that can be a messy undertaking. That's okay. In a small enterprise, everyone can be involved in debating them in all kinds of meetings. In a larger organization, it's a lot tougher. But you can use company-wide meetings, training sessions, and the like for as much personal discussion as possible, and the intranet for broader input. Getting more participation really makes a difference, giving you more insights and more ideas, and at the end of the process, most importantly, much more extensive buy-in. The actual process of creating values, incidentally, has to be iterative. The executive team may come up with a first version, but it should be just that, a first version. Such a document should go out to be poked and probed by people all over an organization, over and over again. And the executive team has to go out of their way to be sure they've created an atmosphere where people feel it's their obligation to contribute. Now, if you're in a company where speaking up gets you whacked, this method of developing values just isn't going to work. I understand that. And as long as you stay, you're going to have to live with that generic plaque in the front hall. But if you're at a company that does welcome debate, and many do, shame on you if you don't contribute to the process. If you want values and behaviors that you understand and can live yourself, you have to make the case for them. It's really in the nitty-gritty details. When I first became CEO, I was certainly guilty of endorsing vague, too cryptic values. For instance, in 1981, I wrote in the annual report that GE leaders must face reality and live excellence and feel ownership. These platitudes sure sounded good, but they had a long way to go toward describing real behaviors. By 1991, we had made a lot of progress. Over the course of the previous 3 years, more than 5,000 employees spent some portion of their time participating in the development of our values. The result was much more concrete. We printed them on laminated wallet cards. The text included imperatives, such as act in a boundaryless fashion, always searching for and applying the best ideas regardless of their source, and be intolerant of bureaucracy, and see change for the growth opportunity it brings. Of course, some of these behaviors required further explanation and interpretation, and we did that all the time, at meetings, during appraisals, and at the water cooler. Since leaving GE, I've realized how much further still we might have been able to push the discussion about values and behaviors. A year ago, I watched Jamie Dimon and Bill Harrison work together to develop values and behaviors for the new company created by the merger of winning1 and J.P. Morgan Chase. The document they used to open the dialogue came from winning1, and it listed values and their corresponding behaviors with a level of detail I had never seen before. Take the value, we treat customers the way we would want to be treated. That's pretty tangible. But winning1 had literally identified the 10 or 12 behaviors that made that value come to life. Here are some. Never let profit center conflicts get in the way of doing what is right for the customer. Secondly, give customers a good, fair deal. Great customer relationships take time. Do not try to maximize short-term profits at the expense of building those enduring relationships. Always look for ways to make it easier to do business with us. And communicate daily with your customers. If they're talking to you, they can't be talking to a competitor. Finally, don't forget to say thank you. Another value Bank One had was we strive to be the low-cost provider through efficient and great operations. Some of the prescribed behaviors included leaner is better, eliminate bureaucracy, cut waste relentlessly, operations should be fast and simple, value each other's time, invest in infrastructure. We should know our business best. We don't need consultants to tell us what to do. If this level of detail feels overwhelming and even doctrinaire to you, I can sympathize. When I first saw Jamie's single-spaced, 5-page values and behaviors document, I nearly fell over. But as I read it, I saw its power. With all the stories I've heard in the past few years from employees and companies around the world, I'm convinced you just cannot be too specific about values and their related behaviors. Beyond that, these values and behaviors have to be backed up. Clarity around values and behaviors is not much good unless it is backed up. To make values really mean something, companies have to reward the people who exhibit them and punish those who don't. Believe me, it'll make winning easier. I say that because every time we asked one of our high-performing managers to leave because he didn't demonstrate the values, and we said as much publicly, the organization responded incredibly well. In annual surveys over a decade, people would tell us that we were a company that increasingly lived its values. That made people even more committed to living them too. And as our employee satisfaction results improved, so did our financial results. And finally, it's in the connection between the mission and the values. A concrete mission is great, and values that describe specific behaviors are too. But for a company's mission and values to truly work together as a winning proposition, they have to be mutually reinforcing. It seems obvious, doesn't it, that a company's values should support its mission. But it's amazingly easy for that not to be the case. A disconnect between the parts of a company's framework is probably more a sin of omission than of commission, but it often happens. In the most common scenario, a company's mission and its values rupture due to the little crises of daily life and business. A competitor moves into town and lowers prices, and so do you, undermining your mission of competing on extreme customer service. Or a downturn hits, so you cut your advertising budget, forgetting your mission is to enhance and extend your brand. These examples of disconnections may sound minor or temporary, but when left unattended, they can really hurt a company. In fact, in the worst-case scenario, they can literally destroy a business. That's how I see what happened at Arthur Andersen and Enron. Arthur Andersen was founded almost a century ago with the mission to become the most respected and trusted auditing firm in the world. It was a company that prided itself on having the courage to say no, even if that meant losing a client. It succeeded by hiring the most capable, highest integrity CPAs and rewarding them for doing work that rightfully earned the confidence of corporations and regulators around the world. Then the boom times of the 1980s arrived, and Arthur Andersen decided they wanted to start a consulting business. That's where the excitement was, not to mention the big money. The company started hiring more MBAs and paying them the constantly escalating salaries that the consulting industry demanded. In 1989, the firm actually split into two divisions, a traditional accounting division called Arthur Andersen and Andersen Consulting. Both fell under one corporate umbrella called Andersen Worldwide. Rather than valuing conscientiousness, consulting firms generally encourage creativity and reward aggressive sales behavior, taking the customer from one project to the next. In the 90s in particular, there was a real cowboy mentality in the consulting industry, and the accounting side of Andersen felt the impact. Some of its accountants clearly got swept up in the momentum, letting go of the auditing business values that had guided them for so long. Throughout most of the 90s, Arthur Andersen was a firm at war with itself. The consulting business was subsidizing the auditing side and didn't like it. And you can be sure the auditing side wasn't crazy about the bravado of the consulting types. In these circumstances, how could people know the answer to questions like, what really is our mission? What values matter most? And how should we behave? Depending on which side of the firm you pledged allegiance to, your answer would be different. And that's ultimately why the partners ended up in court with each other, trying to figure out how to divide the firm's profits. Eventually, in 2002, the house collapsed, due in no small part to the disconnect between its mission and values. In many ways, the same kind of dynamic was behind the Enron collapse. In its prior life, Enron was a simple, rather mundane pipeline and energy company. Everyone was focused on getting gas from point A to point B cheaply and quickly, a mission they accomplished very well by having expertise in energy sourcing and distribution. Then, like Arthur Andersen, the company changed missions. Someone got the idea to turn Enron into a trading company. Again, the goal was faster growth. At Arthur Andersen, auditors wearing green eye shades were suddenly sharing office space with MBAs in Armani suits. At Enron, again, figuratively speaking, the guys in coveralls were suddenly riding the elevator with MBAs in suspenders. Enron's new mission meant it focused first on trading energy and then on trading anything and everything. That change was probably pretty exciting at the time, but obviously no one figured out and explicitly broadcast what values and corresponding behaviors would support such a heady goal. The trading desk was the place to be, and the pipeline and energy generation businesses got shoved to the background. Unfortunately, there were no processes to provide checks and balances for the suspenders crowd. And it was in that context, of no context, that Enron's collapse occurred. Like Arthur Andersen, this story of a mission and values disconnect ends with thousands of innocent people losing their jobs. What a tragedy. Now, this chapter opened with the observation that people in business talk a lot about mission and values, but too often the result is more hot air than real action. No one wants it that way, but the loftiness and the imprecision inherent in both terms always seem to make it end up like that. But there's too much to lose by not getting your mission straight and by not making your values concrete. I'm not saying your company will collapse in flames the way Arthur Andersen and Enron did. They are extreme examples of a mission and values meltdown. But I am saying your company will not reach anywhere near its full potential if all that is guiding it is a list of pleasant platitudes hanging on the lobby wall. Look, I realize defining a good mission and developing the values that support it takes time and enormous commitment. There'll be long, contentious meetings when you'd rather go home. There'll be email debates when you wish you could just go do real work. There'll be painful times when you have to say goodbye to people you really like who just do not get the mission or live its values. On days like those, You might wish your mission and value statements were vague and generic, but they can't be. Take the time, spend the energy, and make them real. The second chapter in this basic philosophy is entitled Candor. I call it the biggest dirty little secret in business. I've always been a huge proponent of candor. In fact, I talked it up to GE audiences for more than 20 years. But since retiring from GE, I've come to realize that I underestimated its rarity. In fact, I would call lack of candor the biggest dirty little secret in business. What a huge problem it is. Lack of candor basically blocks smart ideas, fast actions, and good people contributing all the stuff they've got. It's a killer. When you've got candor, and you'll never completely get it, mind you, everything just operates faster and better. Now, when I say lack of candor here, I'm not talking about malevolent dishonesty. I'm talking about how too many people, too often, instinctively don't express themselves with frankness. They don't communicate straightforwardly or put forth ideas looking to stimulate real debate. They just don't open up. Instead, they withhold comments or criticism. They keep their mouths shut in order to make people feel better or to avoid conflict. And they sugarcoat bad news in order to maintain appearances. They keep things to themselves, hoarding information. That's all lack of candor, and it's absolutely damaging. And yet lack of candor permeates almost every aspect of business. In my travels over the past few years, I've heard stories from people at hundreds of different companies who describe the complete lack of candor they experience day to day in every type of meeting, from budget and product reviews to strategy sessions. People talk about the bureaucracy, layers, politicking, and false politeness that lack of candor spawns. They ask, how can they get their companies to be places where people put their views on the table, talk about the world realistically, and debate ideas from every angle? Most often, I hear that lack of candor is missing from performance appraisals. In fact, I hear about that so often that I always end up asking audiences for a show of hands to the question, how many of you have received an honest, straight between the eyes feedback session in the last year, where you came out knowing exactly what you have to do to improve and where you stand in the organization? On a good day, I get 20% of the hands up. Most of the time, it's closer to 10%. Interestingly, when I turn the question around and ask the audience how often they've given an honest, candid appraisal to their people, the numbers just don't improve much. Forget outside competition when your worst enemy is the way you communicate with one another internally. What is the candor effect? Let's look at how candor leads to winning. There are three main ways. First and foremost, candor gets more people in the conversation. And when you get more people in the conversation, to state the obvious, you get idea rich. By that I mean many more ideas get surfaced, discussed, pulled apart, and improved. Instead of everyone shutting down, everyone opens up and learns. Any organization or unit or team that brings more people in their minds into the conversation has an immediate advantage. Second, candor generates speed. When ideas are in everyone's face, they can be debated rapidly, expanded, enhanced, and acted upon. That approach, surface, debate, improve, decide, isn't just an advantage. It's a necessity in a global marketplace. You can be sure that any upstart 5-person enterprise down the street, or in Shanghai, or in Bangalore, can move faster than you can to begin with. Candor is one of the ways you can keep up. Third, candor cuts costs, lots, although you'll never be able to put a precise number on it. Just think of how it eliminates the meaningless meetings and the BS reports that confirm what everyone already knows. Think of how candor replaces fancy PowerPoint slides and mind-numbing presentations and boring off-site conclaves with real conversations, whether they are about company strategy, a new product introduction, or someone's performance. Put all of its benefits and efficiencies together, and you realize you just can't afford not to have candor. So why not? Why don't you? Given the advantages of candor, you have to wonder, why don't we have more of it? Well, the problem starts young. The facts are we are socialized from childhood to soften bad news or to make nice about awkward subjects. That is true in every culture and in every country and in every social class. It doesn't make any difference if you are in Iceland or Portugal. You don't insult your mother's cooking or call your best friend fat or tell an elderly aunt that you hated her wedding gift. You just don't. What happened at a suburban cocktail party we attended recently is classic. Over white wine and sushi rolls, one woman standing in a cluster of 5 others started lamenting the horrible stress being endured by the local elementary school's music teacher. Other guests chimed in, all agreeing that 4th graders were enough to send you to the insane asylum. Fortunately, just before the music teacher was canonized, another guest entered the conversation saying, "Are you guys crazy? That teacher gets 15 weeks a year off." She pointed to the doctor standing in the circle, who had been nodding away in agreement. "Robert," she said, "you make life and death decisions every day. Surely you don't buy this sad story, do you?" Talk about killing polite chit-chat. The new guest sent everyone scattering, mostly toward the bar. Candor just unnerves people. That was a light-hearted example, of course, but when you try to understand candor, you're really trying to understand human nature. For hundreds of years, psychologists and social scientists have studied why people don't say what they mean, and philosophers have been reflecting on the same subject for literally thousands of years. A good friend of mine, Nancy Bauer, is a professor of philosophy at Tufts University. When I ask her about candor, she tells me that most philosophers have come to the same conclusion on this topic as most of us laypeople do with age and experience. Eventually you come to realize that people don't speak their minds because it's simply easier not to. When you tell it like it is, you can so easily create a mess: anger, pain, confusion, sadness, resentment. To make matters worse, you then feel compelled to clean up that mess, which can be awful and awkward and time-consuming. That's why Nancy says philosophers like Aristotle and Immanuel Kant believe that lack of candor has nothing to do with preventing sadness or pain in another person or with being kind or decent. In fact and in practice, it's all about self-interest, making your own life easier. Nancy, my philosophy friend, told me something else Kant had to say. He said that people lack candor because when you speak your mind and the news isn't good, you stand a strong chance of becoming unpopular. Most human beings, Kant said, will do almost anything to escape that fate. The irony, he said, is that in avoiding candor in order to be liked, people actually destroy trust, and in doing so, ultimately erode a good society. I tell Nancy the same could be said about eroding good businesses. From Aristotle and Kant to now, the make-or-break importance of candor in U.S. business is relatively new, actually. Up until the early 1980s, big companies like GE and thousands of others operated largely without it, as did most companies, regardless of size. These companies were a product of the military-industrial complex that grew up after World War II. They had virtually no global competition, and in fact, companies within industries were so similar to one another they could often seem more collegial than competitive. Take the steel industry. Every 3 years or so, union workers across several companies would demand higher pay and benefits. The steel companies would meet those demands, passing their increased costs onto the automotive industry, which would pass their increased costs onto the consumer. It was a nice party until the Japanese arrived at the door with their average quality, low-cost imported cars that within a few years became high-quality, low-cost cars, many of them made in non-union U.S. factories. But until the foreign threat spread, most American companies had very little to do with the kind of frank debate and fast action that characterizes a candid organization. They had little use for it, and so countless layers of bureaucracy and old-fashioned social codes of behavior led to a kind of enforced politeness and formality throughout most organizations. There were very few overt confrontations about strategy or values. Decisions were made mostly behind closed doors, and when it came to appraisals, those too were conducted with a kind of courteous remoteness. Good performers were praised, but because companies were so financially strong, poor performers could be warehoused in a far-flung department or division until retirement. Without candor, everyone saved face, and business lumbered along. The status quo was accepted, fake behavior was just a day at the office, and people with initiative, gumption, and guts were labeled troublesome or worse. You would predict, perhaps, that given all its competitive advantages, candor would have made a grand entrance with the Japanese. But Japan didn't make it happen, nor did Ireland, Mexico, India, or China, to name a few of the big hitters in the global marketplace today. Instead, most companies have fought global competition through more conventional means, layoffs, drastic cost reductions, and in the best cases, with innovation. Candor, while inching its way in, still remains a very small part of the arsenal. But it can be done. Now for the really bad news. Even though candor is vital to winning, it is hard and time-consuming to instill in any group, no matter what size. It's hard because you're fighting human nature and entrenched organizational behaviors, and time-consuming as in years and years. At GE, it took us close to a decade to use candor as a matter of course, and it was by no means universal after 20. Still, it can be done. There's nothing scientific about the process. To get candor, you reward it, praise it, and talk about it. You make public heroes out of people who demonstrate it. Most of all, you yourself demonstrate it in an exuberant, even exaggerated way, even when you're not the boss. Imagine yourself for a second at a meeting where the subject is growth and how to get it at an old line division. Everyone's sitting around the table, civilly talking about how hard it is to win in this particular market or industry. They discuss the tough competition. They surface the same old reasons why they can't grow and why they're actually doing well in this environment. In fact, by the time the meeting ends, they've managed to pat themselves on the back for the success they've enjoyed under the circumstances. Inside your head, you're about ready to burst as you tell yourself, here we go again. I know Bob and Mary across the room feel the same way I do. The complacency around here is killing us. Outside, all three of you are playing the game. You're nodding. Now imagine an environment where you take responsibility for candor. You, Bob, or Mary would ask questions like, isn't there a new product or service idea in this business somewhere that we just haven't thought of yet? Can we jumpstart this business with an acquisition? Or, this business is taking up so many resources. Why don't we get the hell out of it? What a different meeting. What a lot more fun, and how much better for everyone. Another situation that happens all the time is a high-growth business with a self-satisfied crowd managing it. You know the scene at the long-range planning meeting. The managers show up with double-digit growth, say 15%, and pound out slide after slide, showing how well they are doing. Top management nods their approval, but you're sitting there knowing there's a lot more juice in that business. To compound matters, the people presenting the slides are peers of yours, and there's that age-old code hanging in the air. If you don't challenge mine, I won't challenge yours. Frankly, the only way I know of to get out of this bind and introduce candor is to poke around in a non-threatening way. Geez, you're good. What a terrific job. This is the best business we've got. Why not put more resources into it and go for more? With the great team you've got in place, there must be 10 acquisitions out there for you. Have you looked globally? Those questions, and others like them, have the power to change the meeting from a self-congratulatory parade to a stimulating working session. Now you may be thinking, I can't raise those questions because I don't want to look like a jerk. I want to be a team player. It is true that candid comments definitely freak people out at first. In fact, the more polite or bureaucratic or formal your organization, the more your candor will scare and upset people. And yes, it could kill you. That's a risk, and only you can decide if you're willing to take it. Needless to say, you'll have an easier time of installing candor in your organization if you are closer to the top. But don't blame your boss or the CEO if your company lacks candor. Open dialogue can start anywhere. I was speaking my mind when I had 4 employees at Naril, the smallest, newest unit of a hierarchical company that had a very dim view of straight talk. I was too young and politically clueless to notice at the time, but I was covered because our business was growing by leaps and bounds. If we had the guts to be candid, it didn't feel that way at the time. We didn't know enough to know what candor was. It just felt natural to us to speak openly, argue and debate, and get things to happen fast. If we were anything, it was crazily competitive. Every time I got promoted, the first cycle of reviews, be it budgets or appraisals, was often awkward and unpleasant. Most of the new team I was managing wasn't used to wide-open discussions about everything and anything. For example, we'd be talking about a direct report at a personnel review, and in conversation we would agree that the guy was really awful. His written appraisal, however, made him look like a prince. When I challenged the phoniness out here, yeah, but why would we ever put that in writing? I'd explain why, making the case for candor. By the next review, we'd already be seeing candor's positive impact with a better team in place. And with each successive cycle, more and more people made candor's case with me. Still, it wasn't like I was singing with the whole chorus. From the day I joined GE to the day I was named CEO 20 years later, my bosses cautioned me about my candor. I was labeled abrasive and consistently warned that my candor would soon get in the way of my career. Well, now my career is over, and I'm telling you that it was candor that helped make it work. So many people got into the game, so many voices, so much energy. We gave it to one another straight, and each of us was better for it. Now, we've talked a lot in this chapter about one word, but it's really very simple. Candor works because candor unclutters. Yes, everyone agrees that candor is against human nature. So is waking up at 5 a.m. for the 6:10 train every day. So is eating lunch at your desk, so you won't miss an important meeting at 1. But for the sake of your team or your organizations, you do a lot of things that aren't easy. The good thing about candor is that it's an unnatural act that is more than worth it. It's impossible to imagine a world where everyone goes around saying what they really think all the time. And you probably wouldn't want it anyway. Too much information. But even if we get halfway there, lack of candor wouldn't be the biggest dirty little secret in business anymore. Instead, it would be its biggest change for the better. The third chapter in this fundamental management philosophy is differentiation. Some people have called it cruel and Darwinian. My suggestion is try fair and effective instead. If there's one of my values that really pushes buttons, it is differentiation. Some people love the idea. They swear by it. run their companies with it, and will tell you it is at the very root of their success. Other people hate it. They call it mean, harsh, impractical, demotivating, political, unfair, or all the above. Once during a radio talk show about my first book, a woman in L.A. pulled off the highway to call in and label differentiation cruel and Darwinian. And that was just the beginning of her commentary. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of differentiation. I've seen it transform companies from mediocre to outstanding, and it is as morally sound as a management system can be. It works. Companies win when their managers make a clear and meaningful distinction between top and bottom performing businesses and people, when they cultivate the strong and cull the weak. Companies suffer when every business and person is treated equally, and bets are sprinkled all around like rain on the ocean. When all is said and done, differentiation is just resource allocation, which is what good leaders do, and in fact is one of the chief jobs they are paid to do. A company has only so much money and managerial time. Winning leaders invest where the payback is highest. They cut their losses everywhere else. If that sounds Darwinian, let me add that I am convinced that along with being the most efficient and most effective way to run your company, differentiation also happens to be the fairest and kindest. Ultimately, it makes winners out of everyone. When I was at GE, people discussed differentiation vigorously, but over the years, most people came to strongly support it as our way of doing business. By the time I retired, differentiation was not really a hot topic anymore. The same can't be said for outside the company. Without a doubt, differentiation receives the most questions I get from audiences around the world. As I said, people tend to love it or hate it, but a pretty large number are just confused by it. If I could change one thing about my first book, it would be to add more pages to the discussion of differentiation, explain the topic inside and out, and stressing that differentiation cannot and must not be implemented quickly. At GE, it took us about a decade to install the type of candor and trust that makes differentiation possible. But this chapter is not about implementation. It's about why I believe in differentiation and why you should too. One of the main misunderstandings about differentiation is that it is only about people. That's to miss half of it. Differentiation is a way to manage people and businesses. Basically, differentiation holds that a company has two parts, software and hardware. Software is simple. It's your people. Hardware depends. If you're a large company, your hardware is the different businesses in your portfolio. If you are smaller, your hardware is your product lines. Let's look first at differentiation in terms of hardware. It's pretty straightforward and a lot less incendiary. Every company has strong businesses or product lines and weak ones and some in between. Differentiation requires managers to know which is which and invest accordingly. To do that, of course, you have to have a clear-cut definition of strong. At GE, strong men of business was number one and number two in its market. If it wasn't, the managers had to fix it, sell it, or as a last resort, close it. Other companies have put forward different frameworks for investment decisions. They put their money and time only into businesses or product lines that promise double-digit sales growth, for instance. Or they invest only in businesses or product lines with a 15% or better discounted rate of return. Now, I generally don't like investment criteria that are financial in nature, like DCRR, because the numbers can be jiggered so easily by changing the residual value or any other number of assumptions in an investment proposal. But my point is the same. Differentiation among your businesses or product lines requires a transparent framework that everyone in the company understands. People may not like it, but they know it and they manage with it. In fact, differentiation among businesses and product lines is a powerful management discipline in general. At GE, the number one or number two framework stopped the decades-long practice of sprinkling money everywhere. Most GE managers in the old days probably knew that spreading money all around didn't make sense, but it's so easy to do. There's always that pressure, managers jockeying and politicking for their share of the pie. To avoid warfare, you give everyone a little slice and hope for the best. Companies also sprinkle money evenly for sentimental or emotional reasons. GE hung on to a marginally profitable central air conditioning business for 20 years because people thought it was necessary in order to have a full-line major appliance company. In reality, headquarters hated air conditioning because its success was so dependent on the installers. These independent contractors would put our machines into homes and then drive off, and GE lost control of the brand. Worse, we had a small share of the market and just couldn't make much money on central air conditioning. With the number one or number two framework, we had to sell the business. And when we did, to a company that lived and breathed air conditioning very successfully, GE's former employees discovered the joy of being loved. Moreover, management attention was no longer diverted to an underperforming business, and share owners had better returns. Everybody won. Running your company without differentiation among your businesses or product lines may have been possible when the world was less competitive. But with globalization and digitization, forget it. Managers at every level have to make hard choices and live by them. Now for the people part. Now let's talk about the more controversial topic, differentiation among people. It's a process that requires managers to assess their employees and separate them into three categories in terms of performance: the top 20%, the middle 70%, and the bottom 10%. Then, and this is key, it requires managers to act on that distinction. I emphasize the word act because all managers naturally differentiate in their heads, but very few make it real. When people differentiation is real, the top 20% of employees are showered with bonuses, stock options, praise, love, training, and a variety of rewards to their pocketbooks and their souls. There can be no mistaking the stars of a company that differentiates. They are the best and are treated that way. The middle 70 are managed differently. This group of people is enormously valuable to any company. You simply cannot function without their skills, energy, and commitment. After all, they are the majority of your employees. And that's the major challenge and risk in 2070-10, keeping the middle 70 engaged and motivated. That's why so much of managing the middle 70 is about training, positive feedback, and thoughtful goal setting. If individuals in this group have particular promise, they should be moved around among businesses and functions to increase their experience and knowledge and to test their leadership skills. To be clear, managing the middle 70 is not about keeping people out of the bottom 10. It's not about saving poor performers. That would be a bad investment decision. Rather, differentiation is about managers looking at the middle 70, identifying people with potential to move up, and cultivating them. But everyone in the middle 70 needs to be motivated and made to feel as if they truly belong. You do not want to lose the vast majority of your middle 70. You want to improve them. As for the bottom 10% in differentiation, there's no sugarcoating this. They have to go. That's more easily said than done. It's awful to fire people. I even hate that word. But if you have a candid organization with clear performance expectations and a performance evaluation system, a big if, obviously, but that should be everyone's goal, then people in the bottom 10% generally know who they are. When you tell them They usually leave before you ask them to. No one wants to be in an organization where they aren't wanted. One of the best things about differentiation is that people in the bottom 10% of organizations very often go on to successful careers at companies and in pursuits where they truly belong and where they can excel. That's how differentiation works in a nutshell. People sometimes ask where I came up with the idea. My answer is I didn't invent differentiation. I learned it on the playground when I was a kid. When we were making a baseball team, the best players always got picked first. The fair players were put in the easy positions, usually second base or right field, and the least athletic ones had to watch from the sidelines. Everyone knew where he stood. The top kids wanted desperately to stay there and got the reward of respect and the thrill of winning. The kids in the middle worked their tails off to get better, and sometimes they did, bringing up the quality of play for everyone. And the kids who couldn't make the cut usually found other pursuits, sports and otherwise, that they enjoyed and excelled at. Not everyone can be a great ball player, and not every great ball player can be a great doctor, computer programmer, carpenter, musician, or poet. Each one of us is good at something, and I just believe we are happiest and most fulfilled when we're doing that. It's true on the playground, and it's true in business. Now, there are several reasons to hate differentiation or not. I could spend the next couple of pages explaining all the reasons to love differentiation, but instead I'm going to list the most common criticism the concept receives. I'm leaving aside hardware differentiation here because it doesn't get anything like the heat that 2070-10 does. So here are some of the criticisms of people differentiation. Some have truth in them, but more often than not, they don't. Here's what I mean. Differentiation is unfair because it's always corrupted by company politics. 2070-10 is just a way of separating who kiss the boss's rear from those who don't. It's true, without question, that some companies, differentiation is corrupted by cronyism and favoritism. The top 20% are the boss's head nodders and buddies, and the bottom 10% are the outspoken types who ask difficult questions and challenge the status quo. The middle 70 are just ducking and getting by. That happens, and it stinks. And it is a function of a leadership team lacking in brains or integrity or both. The only good thing I can say about a merit-free system like this is that eventually it destroys itself. It collapses from its own weight or has to change. The results just won't be good enough to sustain the enterprise. Luckily, cases of differentiation abuse can generally be prevented by a candid, clear-cut performance system with defined expectations and goals and timelines, and a program of consistent appraisals. In fact, differentiation can be implemented only after such a system is in place, a process that we will discuss more specifically in the chapter on people management. A second complaint about differentiation is that it is mean and bullying. It's like the playground in the worst possible way. Weak kids are made into fools, outcasts, and objects of ridicule. Man, have I heard this one 100 times, and it drives me crazy, because one of the major advantages of differentiation is that it is good and fair to everyone. When differentiation is working, people know where they stand. You know if you have a strong shot at a big promotion, or if you need to be looking for other opportunities inside or outside the company. Maybe some information is hard to swallow at first, and yes, bad news often hurts. But soon enough, like all knowledge, it's power. In fact, it's liberating. When you know where you stand, you can control your own destiny. And what is more fair than that? Interestingly, when people raise this criticism with me at speaking engagements, I often ask them a question back. I ask if they ever received grades in school. Naturally, everyone says yes. I then ask, did you think getting grades was mean? Well, no, they usually say. Sometimes grades sting, but kids somehow always live through it. And grades have a way of making everything pretty clear. Some people graduate and go on to be astronauts or research scientists or college professors. Others become marketing managers or advertising executives. And still others become nurses, chefs, or even professional surfers. Grades, in fact, guide us, telling us something about ourselves that we need to know. So why should we stop getting grades at age 21? To prevent meanness? Please. A third criticism of differentiation is I'm just too nice to implement something like 20-70-10. Usually people with this complaint about differentiation assert that differentiation as a managerial system does not value people who add intangible things to a business, like a feeling of family or humanity or a sense of history. And we all know of organizations that continue to employ underperformers for a long time, mainly because they are really nice individuals. I fully understand not wanting to manage out somebody nice, but the fact is protecting underperformers always backfires. First of all, by not carrying their weight, they make the pie smaller for everyone. That can cause resentment. It's also not what you would call fair. And an unfair culture never helps a company win. It undermines trust and candor too much. The worst thing, though, is how protecting people who don't perform hurts the people themselves. For years, they are carried along, with everyone looking the other way. At appraisals, they are vaguely told they are great or just doing fine. They're thanked for their contribution. Then a downturn occurs, and layoffs are necessary. The so-called nice underperformers are always almost the first to go, and always the most surprised, because no one has ever told them the truth about their results or lack thereof. The awful thing is that this often happens when the underperformers are in their late 40s or 50s. They've been carried along for most of their careers. Then suddenly, at an age when starting over can be very tough, they're out of a job with no preparation or planning and a kick in the stomach they may never get over. They feel betrayed, and they should. As harsh as it may seem at first, differentiation prevents that tragedy because it is based on performance measures that really count. That's why I believe you are never too nice to implement 20-70-10, only too cowardly. Another favorite criticism, differentiation pits people against one another and undermines teamwork. Try telling that to Joe Torre. The New York Yankees function perfectly well as a team, much to the dismay of Red Sox fans like myself, I might add, with a highly transparent system of differentiation in place. Stars are lavishly rewarded. Underperformers are shown the clubhouse exit. And if that's not enough to make a system of differentiation perfectly clear, the players' salaries are very public. You can have no doubt that differentiation is going on when some team members make $18 million a year and others wearing the same uniform make the major league minimum of $300,000 a year. And yet everyone pulls together for the team to win. Alex Rodriguez loves the thrill of hitting a grand slam home run, but I'm sure it feels a lot better to him when the Yankees win. In July 2004, Derek Jeter made the catch of the year, diving into the stands and coming up with a black eye and a cut face, a photo of which graced every newspaper in New York. A lot of the pain had to be relieved when the Yankees won, coming from behind in the 13th inning in one of the great baseball games of all time. Without question, these two stars love to excel for their own sakes, but you can bet it's always more fun and exciting when the team wins. Their teamwork is a testament to two other things. First, great leadership. Joe Torre obviously understands the challenges of managing in a differentiation environment. Second, the cohesiveness of the Yankees and of so many other sports teams shows the positive impact of an open, honest management system built on performance assessments and aligned rewards. In that way, differentiation doesn't undermine teamwork, it enhances it. In business, there probably would be pandemonium if companies started publishing everyone's salary, and I'm not advocating that here. And yet people always seem to know what their coworkers are making, don't they? That's why they get mad when everyone on a team gets rewarded the same way when only a few people have done the work. They feel cheated and wonder why management can't see the obvious, that not every team member is created equal. Differentiation rewards those members of the team who deserve it. By the way, that annoys only the underperformers. To everyone else, it seems fair. Any fair environment promotes teamwork. Better yet, it motivates people to give their all. And that's what you want. Another favorite criticism is differentiation is only possible in the United States. I wish I could implement it, but because of our cultural values, the people in my country simply won't accept it. I've heard this critique of differentiation since its earliest days at GE, when one of our managers explained that 2070-10 couldn't be implemented in Japan because in that culture, politeness was valued far more than candor. Since then, I've heard the national culture excuse from people in hundreds of companies in dozens of nations. Recently, managers in Denmark told us that their country values egalitarianism too much for differentiation to be widely accepted. We've heard that case made in France, too. A manager in a meeting in Amsterdam told us last year there was too much Calvinism in Dutch bones for the system to work in the Netherlands. I guess the manager believed all rewards come only in heaven if you're chosen to get there. And in China, we heard that differentiation is a long time coming because in most state-owned enterprises, still representing more than 50% of the economy despite market reforms, many of the best jobs and rewards go to the most loyal members of the party, whether they are the most talented or not. Basically, I think the excuses we hear about differentiation's cultural obstacles are just that, excuses. At GE, we couldn't have a company where differentiation existed only in our U.S. operations. First of all, we just believed too much in differentiation's effectiveness. But we also knew that having differentiation only in the United States would have been unfair and confusing, especially for the businesses with both U.S. and global divisions, and for the people who moved around the world for us. We decided early on that we would push through differentiation everywhere we did business, dealing with whatever cultural issues that confronted us. Then an amazing thing happened. Very many cultural issues didn't confront us. Once we made the case for differentiation, and we linked it to a candid performance appraisal system, it worked as well in Japan as it did in Ohio. In fact, people who at first thought it could never work in that country came to support it strongly for its honesty, fairness, and clarity. As I mentioned, very often when I get the comment, we can't have differentiation in my country, it comes from managers who admit they themselves support the approach. Their resistance grows out of the assumption that their people will object based on cultural values. My advice to them is to move slowly, but to go for it anyway. They will be surprised that they are not alone because differentiation, once in practice for a while, makes its own case in any language. Another complaint about differentiation goes like this. Differentiation is fine for the top 20% and the bottom 10 because they know where they're going, but it's enormously demotivating for the middle 70% who end up living in an awful kind of limbo. Again, there's an element of truth in this complaint. The middle 70% is the hardest category to manage in differentiation. The biggest problem comes with the individuals in the top tier of the 70%, because they know they are not a whole lot different from the top 20 performers, and often a whole lot better than the bottom tier of their own crowd. And yes, that can be enervating, and sometimes talented middle 70 people leave because of it. The silver lining to this difficult situation is that the existence of a middle 70 forces companies to manage themselves better. It forces leaders to scrutinize people more closely than they would ordinarily and to provide more consistent, candid feedback. It pushes companies to build training centers that really make a difference. For instance, before differentiation, our Crotonville, New York training center was often used in the 1970s as a warehouse where businesses could afford to send their underperformers. It was like a way station on the road to early retirement. The rigor of 2070-10 helped us change that. We turned Crotonville into a place where the top 20 and the best of the middle 70 talked about ideas, debated our approach to business, and got to know and understand one another a lot better. And since senior management spent several hours with each class, it also gave us a rough idea as to just how rigorously differentiation was being practiced in the field. Another piece of silver lining is that while being in the middle 70% can be demotivating to some, it actually revs the engine of many others. For the people in the top 20, for instance, the very existence of a middle 70 gives them yet another reason to pull out all the stops every day. They have to keep getting better to keep their high standing. What a rush that can be. After all, most people want to improve and grow every day. For a lot of people in the middle 70, getting better is energizing too. Getting into the top 20 gives them a tangible goal, and having that goal makes them work harder, think more creatively, share more ideas, and overall fight the good fight every day. It makes work more of a challenge and a lot more fun. Finally, critics like to say, differentiation favors people who are energetic and extroverted and undervalues people who are shy and introverted, even if they are talented. I don't know if it's good or bad, but the world generally favors people who are energetic and extroverted. That's also something you learn young, and it's reinforced in school, at church, at camp, in clubs, and usually at home too. By the time you get to work, if you are still shy and introverted and somewhat low in energy, there are professions and jobs where those characteristics are advantageous. If you know yourself, you will find them. This criticism of differentiation, which I hear now and then, is not really about differentiation, but about society's values. I might add that in business, energetic and extroverted people generally do better, but results speak for themselves, loud and clear, and differentiation hears them. If you want the best people on your team, you need to face up to differentiation. I don't know of any people management system that does it better, with more transparency, fairness, and speed. It isn't perfect by any means, but differentiation, like candor, clarifies business and makes it run better in every way. The final chapter in this management philosophy section is about voice and dignity. It really means getting every brain in the game. Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, has a saying, "Know what you believe." I think he's right. So I want to conclude this section of the book with one of my core beliefs. I mention it because it is the hinge for every principle you've just heard about: mission and values, candor, and differentiation. The belief is this: every person in the world wants voice and dignity, and every person deserves them. By voice, I mean people want the opportunity to speak their minds and have their ideas, opinions, and feelings heard, regardless of their nationality, gender, age, or culture. By dignity, I mean people inherently and instinctively want to be respected for their work and effort and individuality. If you've just read the above and said, well, obviously, then fine. I'm assuming that most people are having that response. And maybe the belief in voice and dignity doesn't even need to be stated. It's so widely accepted and its importance is so self-evident. But I've been surprised over the past couple of years at how often I end up coming back to this value when I talk about winning. Last year in China, a young woman in the audience stood and literally in tears asked how any business person in her country could practice candor and differentiation when only the voice of the boss is allowed. We, the people underneath, have so many ideas, but we cannot even imagine speaking them until we are the boss, she said. That is fine if you are an entrepreneur and start your own company. Then you are the boss, she said. But some of us are not able to do that. I said that in the early days of GE's operation in China, I had seen the difficulties she had just described at our factories in Nansha, Shanghai, and Beijing. But as the plants developed and business practices evolved, I had seen an enormous improvement in how the Chinese leaders who worked for GE were listening to employees. I told her that I was confident that, with China's expanding market economy and the maturation of its management practices, a more inclusive approach would eventually spread. But the repression of voice and dignity is hardly a Chinese problem. In fact, while the Chinese woman was very emotional in her questioning, people in every country I visited share some of her frustration and concern on this matter. Now, when you're running a unit or a division, you rarely think that people aren't speaking up or they're not respected. It feels like the people around you certainly are, and your days are filled with visits, calls, and notes from people with strong opinions. But it ends up that what you experience is a skewed example. The majority of people in most organizations don't say anything because they feel they can't and because they haven't been asked. That became clear to me in the late 1980s, just about every time I had a marathon session at our training center in Crotonville. Detailed questions about local business issues, questions that should have been answered back on home turf, were thrown at me from every direction. Why is the refrigeration plant getting all the new equipment while we're letting laundry suffer? And what are we moving the G90 engine assembly to Durham for when we can do it right here in Evendale? Were a couple of the questions. In frustration, after several such questions, I'd invariably stop the class to ask, why aren't you asking those questions to your own bosses? The answer would come back, I can't bring that up, I'd get killed. Why can you ask me, I'd say? Because we feel anonymous here. After a year or so of these kinds of exchanges, we realized we had to do something to create an environment back in the businesses where people at every level would speak out the way they did at Crotonville. The workout process was born. These were 2 or 3 day events held at GE sites around the world, patterned after New England town meetings. Groups of 30 to 100 employees would come together with an outside facilitator to discuss better ways of doing things and how to eliminate some of the bureaucracy and roadblocks that were hindering them. The boss would be present at the beginning of each session, laying out the rationale for the workout. He or she would also commit to 2 things: to give an on-the-spot yes or no to 75% of the recommendations that came out of the session, and to resolve the remaining 25% within 30 days. The boss would then disappear until the end of the session, so as not to stifle open discussion, returning only at the end to make good on his or her promise. Tens of thousands of these sessions took place over several years, until they became a way of life in the company. They are no longer big events, but part of how GE goes about solving problems. Whether it was a refrigeration plant in Louisville, Kentucky, where employees debated faster and better paint systems, or a jet engine plant in Rutland, Vermont, where employees had recommendations on how to cut cycle time in blade manufacturing, or a credit card processing facility in Cincinnati, where employees had ideas about billing efficiency, workouts led to an explosion in productivity. They brought every brain into the game. A middle-aged appliance worker who was at one workout spoke for thousands of people when he told me, "For 25 years you paid for my hands when you could have had my brains as well, for nothing." At last, because of workout, we were getting both. In fact, I believe workout was responsible for one of the most profound changes in GE during my time there. For the vast majority of employees, the boss knows all culture disappeared. A big bureaucracy like GE needed something as systematized as workout to break the ice and get people to open up. But it is not the only method to make sure your team or company is getting every voice heard. Find an approach that feels right to you. I'm not saying that everyone's opinions should be put into practice or every single complaint needs to be satisfied. That's what management judgment is all about. Obviously, some people have better ideas than others. Some people are smarter or more experienced or more creative. But everyone should be heard and respected. They want it, and you need it. We're now moving to the second part of the book entitled Your Company. This has a number of chapters that relate to the inner workings of your company. The first one is leadership, and it has a rather different subtitle. It's not just about you. One day, you become a leader. On Monday, you're doing what comes naturally, enjoying your job, running a project, talking and laughing with colleagues about life and work, and gossiping about how stupid management can be. Then on Tuesday, you are management. You're a boss. Suddenly, everything feels different. Because it is different. Leadership requires distinct behaviors and attitudes, and for many people, they debut with the job. Before you are a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others. Without question, there are lots of ways to be a leader. You need to look only as far as the freewheeling, savvy, straight-talking Herb Kelleher, who ran Southwest Airlines for 30 years, and Microsoft's quiet, brilliant innovator Bill Gates, to know that leaders come in all varieties. In politics, take Churchill and Gandhi. In football, take Lombardi and Belichick. Each of these leaders would give you a different set of leadership rules. If asked, I would give you 8. They didn't feel like rules when I was using them. They just felt like the right way to lead. This is not the last you will hear of leadership in this book. Virtually every chapter touches on the subject, from crisis management to strategy to work-life balance. But I'm starting with a separate chapter on leadership because it's always on people's minds. Over the past 3 years, during my talks with students, managers, and entrepreneurs, leadership questions invariably were asked. What does a leader really do, for instance? And, I was just promoted and I've never run anything before. How can I be a good leader? Once in Chicago, an audience member said, I have at least 2 direct reports who are smarter than I am. How can I possibly appraise them? These kinds of questions have pushed me to make sense of my own leadership experiences over 40 years. Across the decades, circumstances varied widely. I ran teams with 3 people and divisions with 30,000. I managed businesses that were dying and ones that were bursting with growth. There were acquisitions, divestitures, organizational crises, moments of unexpected luck, good economies, and bad. And yet some ways of leading always seemed to work. They became my rules. Here they are. 1. Leaders relentlessly upgrade their team, using every encounter as an opportunity to evaluate, coach, and build self-confidence. 2. Leaders make sure people not only see the vision, they live and breathe it. 3. Leaders get into everyone's skin, exuding positive energy and optimism. 4. Leaders establish trust with candor, transparency, and credit. 5. Leaders have the courage to make unpopular decisions and gut calls. 6. Leaders probe and push with a curiosity that borders on skepticism, making sure their questions are answered with action. 7. Leaders inspire risk-taking and learning by setting the example. And finally, 8. Leaders celebrate. Before we look at each rule, a word on paradoxes. Leadership is loaded with them. The granddaddy of them all is the short-long paradox, as in the question I often get, how can I manage quarterly results and still do what's right for my business 5 years out? My answer is, welcome to the job. Look, anyone can manage for the short term. Just keep squeezing the lemon. And anyone can manage for the long. Just keep dreaming. You were made a leader because someone believed you could squeeze and dream at the same time. They saw in you a person with enough insight, experience, and rigor to balance the conflicting demands of short and long-term results. Performing balancing acts every day is, in fact, leadership. Take Rule 3 and Rule 6. One says you should show positive energy and optimism, showering your people with a can-do attitude. The other says you should constantly question your people and take nothing they say for granted. Or Rule 5 and 7. One says you need to act like a boss, asserting authority. The other says you need to admit mistakes and embrace people who take risks, especially when they fail. Of course, life would be easier if leadership was just a list of simple rules, but paradoxes are inherent to the trade. That's part of the fun of leading, though. Each day is a challenge. It's a brand new chance to get better at a job that when all is said and done, you can never be perfect at. You can only give it everything you've got. Here's how. Back to Rule 1. Leaders relentlessly upgrade their team, using every encounter as an opportunity to evaluate, coach, and build self-confidence. After the Boston Red Sox finally broke an 86-year drought and won the World Series, you couldn't turn on the TV or open a paper without hearing speculation as to why 2004 was the year. There were theories about everything, from center fielder Johnny Damon's hairstyle to the lunar eclipse. Most people agreed, however, that the reason wasn't mysterious at all. The Red Sox had the best players. The pitching staff was the league's best. The fielders were good enough, and the hitters, well, they were sensational. And they were all bound together by a winning spirit, so palpable you could feel it in the air. Now, there are lucky breaks and bad calls in any season, but the team with the best players usually does win. And that is why, very simply, you need to invest the majority of your time and energy as a leader in 3 activities. You have to evaluate, making sure the right people are in the right jobs, supporting and advancing those who are, and moving out those who are not. You have to coach, guiding, critiquing, and helping people to improve their performance in every way. And finally, you have to build self-confidence, pouring out encouragement, caring, and recognition. Self-confidence energizes, and it gives your people the courage to stretch, take risks, and achieve beyond their dreams. It's the fuel of winning teams. Too often, managers think that people development occurs once a year in performance reviews. That's not even close. People development should be a daily event, integrated into every aspect of your regular goings-on. Take budget reviews. They're a perfect occasion to focus on people. That's right, people. Yes, you have to talk about the business and its results, but in a budget review, you can really see team dynamics in action. If everyone around the table sits silent and frozen while the team leader pontificates, you've got some serious coaching to do. If everyone's involved in the presentation and the whole team is alive, you've got a great opportunity to give immediate feedback that you like what you see. If the team has a real star or dud in its midst, Share your impressions with its leader as soon as you can. There is no event in your day that cannot be used for people development. Customer visits are a chance to evaluate your sales force. Plant tours are an opportunity to meet promising new line managers and see if they have the ability to run something bigger. A coffee break at a meeting is an opportunity to coach a team member who's about to give his first major presentation. And remember, in all these encounters, evaluating and coaching are great, but building self-confidence is, in the end, probably the most important thing you can do. Take every opportunity to inject self-confidence into those who have earned it. Use ample praise. The more specific, the better. Besides its huge impact on upgrading the team, the best thing about using every encounter for people development is how much fun it is. Instead of mind-numbing meetings about numbers and plant tours showing off new machines, every day is about growing people. In fact, you think of yourself as a gardener with a watering can in one hand and a can of fertilizer in the other. Occasionally you have to pull some weeds, but most of the time you just nurture and tend. Then watch everything bloom. Rule number 2. Leaders make sure people not only see the vision, they live and breathe it. It goes without saying that leaders have to set the team's vision, and most do. But there's so much more to the vision thing than that. As a leader, you have to make the vision come alive. How do you do that? First of all, no jargon. Goals cannot sound noble but vague. Targets cannot be so blurry they can't be hit. Your direction has to be so vivid that if you randomly woke up one of your employees in the middle of the night and asked him, "Where are we going?" in a half-asleep stupor, he could still answer, "We're going to keep improving our service to individual contractors and expand our market by aggressively reaching out to small wholesalers." I had just that kind of experience last year when I was out hawking an investment fund for Clayton, Dubilier & Rice, where I consult. At one dinner session in Chicago, the room was filled with about a dozen investors, all focused on our investment criteria and projections for returns. Steve Klimkowski, the Chief Investment Officer of Northwestern Memorial Healthcare, was one of them. But in the midst of all the financial chatter, he was just as interested in talking about his hospital's mission to deliver excellent patient care from the patient's perspective. He had examples of how employees at every level, including him, the investment guy, had transformed their work to fulfill the vision. He had been coached, for example, never to give outpatients directions to a location in the hospital, but to walk them there. At his performance review, Steve had been asked to list several ways in which he personally had improved the patient's experience at Northwestern Memorial. In fact, Steve's understanding of his role in achieving the mission and his passion for it were so real that after talking to him for 15 minutes, you could wake me in the middle of the night and I could tell you about it. Clearly, Northwestern Memorial's leaders had communicated the hospital vision with amazing clarity and consistency. And that's the point. You have to talk about vision constantly, basically to the point of gagging. There were times I talked about the company's direction so many times in one day that I was completely sick of hearing it myself. But I realized the message was always new to someone. And so you keep on repeating it. And you talk to everyone. One of the most common problems in organizations is that leaders communicate the vision to their closest colleagues, and its implications never filter down to people in frontline positions. Think about all the times you've bumped into a rude or harried clerk at a high-service department store, or been put on hold by a call center operator at a company that promises speed and convenience. Somehow, they haven't heard the mission. Maybe because it wasn't shouted in their direction, loud enough or often enough, or maybe the rewards weren't aligned. And that's the final piece of this particular leadership rule. If you want people to live and breathe the vision, show them the money when they do, be it with salary, bonus, or significant recognition of some sort. To quote a friend of mine, Chuck Ames, the former chairman and CEO of Reliance Electric, show me a company's various compensation plans, and I'll show you how its people behave. Vision is an essential element of the leader's job, but no vision is worth the paper it's printed on unless it is communicated constantly and reinforced with rewards. Only then will it leap off the page and come to life. Rule number 3. Leaders get into everyone's skin, exuding positive energy and optimism. You know that old saying, the fish rots from the head. It's mainly used to refer to how politics and corruption filter down in an organization. But it could just as easily be used to describe the effect of a bad attitude at the top of any team, large or small. Eventually, everyone's infected. The leader's mood is, for lack of a better word, catching. You've seen the dynamic 100 times. An upbeat manager who goes through the day with a positive outlook somehow ends up running a team or organization filled with, well, upbeat people with positive outlooks. A pessimistic sourpuss somehow ends up with an unhappy tribe all his own. Unhappy tribes have a tough time winning. Of course, sometimes there are good reasons to be down. The economy is bad, competition is brutal, whatever. Work can be hard. But your job as leader is to fight the gravitational pull of negativism. That doesn't mean you sugarcoat the challenges your team faces. It does mean you display an energizing, can-do attitude about overcoming them. It means you get out of your office and into everyone's skin, really caring about what they're doing and how they're faring as you take the hill together. Now you might be thinking, that kind of emotional bonding, it just ain't me. And it isn't for some people. I've seen a few capable managers run their businesses while keeping their people at arm's length. These managers often demonstrated the right values, like candor and rigor, and they delivered good results. But in never really getting inside their people, something was lost. Work stayed work. The right attitude could have made it so much more. Make that attitude yours. Rule 4. Leaders establish trust with candor, transparency, and credit. For some people, becoming a leader can be a real power trip. They relish the feeling of control over both people and information, and so they keep secrets, reveal little of their thinking about people and their performance, and hoard what they know about the business and its future. This kind of behavior certainly establishes the leader as boss, but it drains trust right out of a team. What is trust? I could give you a dictionary definition, but you know it when you feel it. Trust happens when leaders are transparent, candid, and keep their word. It's that simple. Your people should always know where they stand in terms of their performance. They have to know how the business is doing. And sometimes the news is not good, such as imminent layoffs, and any normal person would rather avoid delivering it. But you have to fight that impulse to pad or diminish hard messages, or you'll pay with your team's confidence and energy. Leaders also establish trust by giving credit where credit's due. They never score off their own people by stealing an idea and claiming it as their own. They don't kiss up and kick down because they are self-confident and mature enough to know that their team's success will get them recognition, and sooner rather than later. In bad times, leaders take responsibility for what's gone wrong. In good times, they generously pass around the praise. When you become a leader, sometimes you really feel the pull to say, look at what I've done. When your team excels, it's only normal to want some credit yourself. After all, you run the show. You hand out the paychecks. So people listen to your every word, or at least pretend to, and they laugh at all your jokes, or pretend to. In some cases, being boss means getting a special parking place or traveling first class. It could go to your head. You could really start to feel pretty big. Don't let it happen. Remember, when you were made a leader, you weren't given a crown. You were given a responsibility to bring out the best in others. For that, your people need to trust you, and they will as long as you demonstrate candor, give credit, and stay real. Rule number 5. Leaders have the courage to make unpopular decisions and gut calls. By nature, some people are consensus builders. Some people long to be loved by everyone. Those behaviors can really get you in the soup if you're a leader, because no matter where you work or what you do, there are times you'll have to make hard decisions. Let people go, cut funding to a project, or close a plan. Obviously, tough calls spawn complaints and resistance. Your job is to listen and explain yourself clearly, but move forward. Do not dwell or cajole. You are not a leader to win a popularity contest. You're a leader to lead. Don't run for office. You're already elected. Sometimes making a decision is hard, not because it's unpopular, but because it comes from your gut and defies a technical rationale. Much has been written about the mystery of gut, but it's really just pattern recognition, isn't it? You've seen something so many times, you just know what's going on this time. The facts may be incomplete or the data limited, but the situation feels very, very familiar to you. Leaders are faced with gut calls all the time. You're asked to invest in a new office building, for instance, but visiting the city, you see cranes in every direction. The deal's numbers are absolutely perfect, you're told, but you've been here before. You know that overcapacity is around the corner, and the perfect investment is about to be worth 60 cents on the dollar. You've got no proof, but you've got a real uh-oh feeling in your stomach. You have to kill the deal, even if that pisses people off. Sometimes the hardest gut calls involve picking people. You made a candidate who has all the right stuff. His resume is perfect, prestigious schools and great experience. His interview is impressive, firm handshake, good eye contact, smart questions, and so on. But something nags at you. Maybe he's moved around an awful lot. He's just had too many jobs in too few years without a plausible enough explanation. Or his energy seems too frantic. Or one previous boss said nice things about him, but didn't sound as though he really meant them. And you're left with that uh-oh feeling in your stomach again. Don't hire the guy. You've been made a leader because you've seen more and been right more times. Listen to your gut. It's telling you something. Rule number 6. Leaders probe and push with a curiosity that borders on skepticism, making sure their questions are answered with action. When you're an individual contributor, you try to have all the answers. That's your job, to be an expert, the best at what you do, maybe even the smartest person in the room. When you're a leader, your job is to have all the questions. You have to be incredibly comfortable looking like the dumbest person in the room. Every conversation you have about a decision, a proposal, or a piece of market information has to be filled with you saying, what if, and why not, and how come? When I was first made a manager in 1963, I was running a startup with a product that went to market through a large pool sales force. I knew we weren't getting enough attention from the people in the field. So every weekend I would take home carbon copies of the sales reports filed after every customer visit. Piles of them. On Mondays, I would make a pest of myself with a round of phone calls, asking the salespeople or the plant manager to explain everything I didn't understand. Why, for instance, were we giving truckload pricing to one customer for small lot sales? Why was another customer getting a product with black specks? These questions got the sales team to give our product the attention it needed and increased my understanding of how it was sold. Questioning, however, is never enough. You have to make sure your questions unleash debate and raise issues that get action. Remember, just because you're a leader, saying something doesn't mean it will happen. That was the case back in the early 90s when I was pretty much obsessed with the idea of an MRI machine with a larger opening. If you ever have had an MRI, you'll know what I'm talking about. You lie on your back and are slid inside a tunnel containing a spinning magnet. At the time, the tunnel, or bore as it was called, was very narrow, and patients were experiencing claustrophobia during the 40-minute MRI process. Word was that Hitachi was coming up with a machine with a much wider bore, but some members of our medical business dismissed the product. Hospitals, they said, would never accept the low-quality images such large bore machines produced. Having experienced an MRI myself, I just wasn't convinced. The machines did make you feel claustrophobic. Every chance I got, I asked the medical team to look at the situation again. Won't hospitals compromise image quality for patient comfort, especially for simple procedures like elbows and knees? Won't the technology eventually improve? In response, the medical team gave me the all-too-common business head fake. We'll look into it, they kept assuring me. Of course, they didn't. I was a know-nothing, meddling pain in the neck, and they were just trying to mollify me. A year later, Hitachi rolled out a large bore machine and captured a significant piece of the market. We spent 2 years playing catch-up. Now, the last thing I want to sound like with this story is a hero. Just the opposite. I should have pushed a whole lot harder with my questioning. In fact, I should have insisted we put resources into developing our own large bore machine. All we were left with at the end was me thinking I knew it and wanting to say I told you so. Both of those sentiments are worth nothing. You would assume that was obvious, but I've seen more leaders believe that second-guessing absolves them from responsibility when things go wrong. Years ago, I used to see a well-known CEO socially on a fairly regular basis. Whenever his company had been in the news for screwing up, he'd always say something like, "I knew they shouldn't have done that." For some reason, that made him feel better. But what did it matter? We've all been guilty at one point or another in our careers of boasting of perfect hindsight. It's a terrible sin. If you don't make sure your questions and concerns are acted upon, it doesn't count. I realize most people don't love the probing process. It's annoying to believe in a product or come into a room with a beautiful presentation only to have it picked apart with questions from the boss. But that's the job. You want bigger and better solutions. Questions, healthy debate, decisions, and action will get everyone there. Rule number 7. Leaders inspire risk-taking and learning by setting the example. Winning companies embrace risk-taking and learning. But in reality, these two concepts often get lip service and little else. Too many managers urge their people to try new things and then whack them in the head when they fail. And too many live in not-invented-here worlds of their own making. If you want your people to experiment and expand their minds, set the example yourself. Consider risk-taking. You can create a culture that welcomes risk-taking by freely admitting your mistakes and talking about what you've learned from them. I cannot count the number of times I've told people about my first big mistake, and it was huge, blowing up a pilot plant in Pittsfield, Massachusetts in 1963. I was across the street in my office when the explosion occurred, set off by a spark igniting a large tank of volatile solution. The noise was enormous, and then roof shingles and shards of glass flew everywhere. Smoke blanketed the area. Thank God no one was hurt. Despite the enormity of my mistake, my boss's boss, a former MIT professor named Charlie Reed, did not beat me up. Instead, his sympathetic, scientific probing of the reasons for the incident taught me not only how to improve our manufacturing process, but more importantly, how to deal with people when they were down. That wasn't the only mistake in my career. I made plenty. I bought the investment bank Kidder Peabody, a cultural fit disaster, and made many wrong hires, to name just two more. These experiences were nothing to feel great about, but I talked about them openly in order to show that it was okay to take swings and miss as long as you learn from them. You don't need to be preachy or particularly somber about your errors. In fact, the more humorous and lighthearted you can be about them, the more people will get the message that mistakes aren't fatal. As for learning, again, live it yourself. Just because you're the boss doesn't mean you are the source of all knowledge. Whenever I learned about a best practice that I liked at another company, I would come back to GE and make a scene. Maybe I often overstated the case, but I wanted people to know how enthusiastic I was about the new idea. And I was. You can and should learn from one another, too. Remember that executive in Chicago who asked me how he could appraise people who were smarter than he was? The answer I gave him was, learn from them. In the best case scenario, all your people will be smarter than you. It doesn't mean you can't lead them. There is no edict in the world that will make people take risks or spend their time learning. In most cases, their risk-reward equation just isn't obvious enough. If you want to change that, set the example yourself. You'll love the exciting culture you create and the results you get. And so will your team. Rule 8. Leaders celebrate. What is it about celebrating that makes managers so nervous? Maybe throwing a party doesn't seem professional, or it makes managers worried that they won't look serious to the powers that be, or that if things get too happy at the office, people will stop working their tails off. Whatever the reason, there is just not enough celebrating going on at work anywhere. When I travel, I frequently ask audiences if they've done anything to recognize their team's achievements, large or small, over the past year. I'm not talking about those stilted, company-orchestrated parties that everyone hates, in which the whole team is marched out to a local restaurant for an evening of forced merriment when they'd rather be home. I'm talking about sending a team to Disney World with their families, or giving each team member 2 tickets to a great show in New York, or handing each team member a new iPod or the like. But to my question, do you celebrate enough? Almost no one raises a hand. It's not as if GE was immune to this phenomenon. I harped on the importance of celebrating for 20 years. But during my last trip as CEO to our training center in Crotonville, I asked the 100 or so managers in the class, do you celebrate enough in your units? Even knowing what I wanted them to say, less than half answered yes. What a lost opportunity. Celebrating makes people feel like winners and creates an atmosphere of recognition and positive energy. Imagine a team winning the World Series without champagne spraying everywhere. You just can't. And yet companies win all the time and let it go without so much as a high five. Work is just too much a part of life not to recognize moments of achievement. Grab as many as you can. Make a big deal out of them. If you don't, no one will. Now, in the end, there is no easy formula for being a leader, if only. Leadership is challenging. All those balancing acts, all the responsibility, all that pressure. And yet, good leadership happens, and it comes in all kinds of packages. There are quiet leaders and bombastic ones. There are analytical leaders and more impulsive ones. Some are tough as nails with their teams, others more nurturing. On the surface, you'd be hard-pressed to say what qualities these leaders share. Underneath, though, you would surely see that the best care passionately about their people, about their growth and success, and you would see that they themselves are comfortable in their own skins. They're real, filled with candor and integrity, optimism and humanity. I'm often asked if leaders are born or made. The answer, of course, is both. Some characteristics, like IQ and energy, seem to come with the package. On the other hand, you learn some leadership skills, like self-confidence at your mother's knee, and at school, in academics and sports. And you learn others at work through iterative experience, trying something, getting it wrong, and learning from it, or getting it right and gaining the self-confidence to do it again, only better. For most of us, leadership happens one day when you become a boss and the rules change. Before, your job was about yourself. Now it's about them. The second chapter in the Your Company part of this book is called Hiring. What winners are made of. How to hire the right people. Sometimes when I appear before business audiences, I get a question that really stumps me, as in, I have no clue about the right answer. A couple of years ago, at a convention of insurance executives in San Diego, for instance, a woman stood up and said, "What is the one thing you should ask in an interview to help you decide whom to hire?" I shook my head. "The one thing," I said. "I can't come up with one. What do you think?" "That's why I'm asking you," she replied. The audience roared, certainly because I was so floored, but also because they could probably relate. Hiring good people is hard. Hiring great people is brutally hard. And yet nothing matters more in winning than getting the right people on the field. All the clever strategies and advanced technologies in the world are nowhere near as effective without great people to put them to work. Because hiring is so important and so challenging, there's a lot of territory to cover in this chapter. First, we'll take a short look at 3 acid tests you need to conduct before you even think about hiring someone. Next, we'll lay out the 4E and 1P framework for hiring that I have used for many years. It's named after the 4 characteristics it contains, which all begin with E, a nice coincidence. There's a P for passion in there too. After that, we'll explore the 4 special characteristics you look for when hiring leaders. The previous chapter was about what you do when you're a leader, the rules for leadership, as it were. This section is about how to hire leaders in the first place. Finally, I'll answer 6 FAQs, frequently asked questions, about hiring that I get during my travels, plus that impossible one from that insurance executive in San Diego. After all, I've had a couple of years to think it over. First, the acid tests. Before you even think about assessing people for a job, they have to pass through 3 screens. Remember, these tests should come at the outset of the hiring process, not right before you're about to sign on the dotted line. The first test is for integrity. Integrity is something of a fuzzy word, so let me tell you my definition. People with integrity tell the truth, and they keep their word. They take responsibility for past actions, admit mistakes, and fix them. They know the laws of their country, industry, and company, both in letter and spirit, and abide by them. They play to win the right way by the rules. How can you test for integrity? If a candidate comes from inside your company, that's pretty easy. You've seen him or her in action or know someone who has. From the outside, you need to rely on reputation and reference checks. But those aren't foolproof. You also have to rely on your gut. Does the person seem real? Does she openly admit mistakes? Does he talk about his life with equal measures of candor and discretion? Over time, many of us develop an instinct for integrity. Don't be afraid to use it. The second test is for intelligence. That doesn't mean a person must have read Shakespeare or can solve complex physics problems. It does mean the candidate has a strong dose of intellectual curiosity, with a breadth of knowledge to work with or lead other smart people in today's complex world. Sometimes people confuse education with intelligence. I certainly did that at the start of my career. But with experience, I learned that smart people come from every kind of school. I've known many extremely bright people from places like Harvard and Yale, but some of the best executives I've worked with have attended places like Bryant University in Providence, Rhode Island, and the University of Dubuque in Iowa. GE was lucky to have all these people on its team. My point is that a candidate's education is only a piece of the picture, especially when it comes to intelligence. The third ticket to the game is maturity. You can, by the way, be mature at any age, and immature too. Regardless, there are certain traits that seem to indicate a person has grown up. The individual can withstand the heat, handle stress and setbacks, and alternatively, when those wonderful moments arise, enjoy success with equal parts of joy and humility. Mature people respect the emotions of others. They feel confident but are not arrogant. In fact, mature people usually have a sense of humor, especially about themselves. As with integrity, there's no real test for maturity. Again, you have to rely on reference checks, reputation, and most important, gut. After passing the 3 acid tests, I like to think about leadership in terms of the 4E and 1P framework. And in hiring people, have used this for years. The 4E framework took years for me to solidify. No doubt other people have other frameworks that work very well in building winning teams, but I found this one was consistently effective, year after year, across businesses and borders. The first E is positive energy. We just talked about this characteristic in the chapter on leadership. It means the ability to go, to thrive on action and relish change. People with positive energy are generally extroverted and optimistic. They make conversation and friends easily. They start the day with enthusiasm and usually end it that way too, rarely seeming to tire in the middle. They don't complain about working hard. They love to work. They also love to play. People with positive energy just love life. The second E is the ability to energize others. Positive energy is the ability to get other people revved up. People who energize can inspire their team to take on the impossible and enjoy the hell out of doing it. In fact, people would arm wrestle for the chance to work with them. Now, energizing others is not just about giving patent-esque speeches. It takes a deep knowledge of your business and strong persuasion skills to make a case that will galvanize others. A great example of an energizer is Charlene Begley, who started with GE as a financial management trainee in 1988. After several years in various jobs, Charlene was selected to run GE's Six Sigma program in the transportation business. That's where her leadership really began to shine. Galvanized by her intensity, her team really got its Six Sigma program on the corporate radar screen. It's hard to unpick Charlene's ability to energize because it's a brew of skills all mixed together. She's a great communicator who can clearly define objectives. She's dead serious about work, but she doesn't take herself too seriously. In fact, she has a good sense of humor and shares credit readily. Her attitude is always upbeat, no matter how hard the job. It can get done. Charlene's ability to energize that Six Sigma team was one of the key characteristics that got her out of the pile and set her on GE's fast track. After Six Sigma and a couple of other leadership roles, she was made head of GE's corporate audit staff and eventually became CEO of GE Fanuc Automation. Today, at 38, Charlene is CEO and president of GE's $3 billion rail business. The third E is edge, the courage to make the tough yes or no decisions. Look, the world is filled with gray. Anyone can look at an issue from every different angle. Some smart people can and will analyze those angles indefinitely. But effective people know when to stop assessing and make a tough call, even without total information. Nothing is worse than a manager at any level who can't cut bait. The type that always says, bring it back in a month, and we'll take a good hard look at it again. Or that awful type that says yes to you, and then when someone else comes in the room, changes his mind. We call these wishy-washy types last one out the door bosses. Some of the smartest people that I've hired over the years, many of them from consulting, had real difficulty with edge, especially when they were put into operations. In every situation, they always saw too many options, which inhibited them from taking action. That indecisiveness kept their organizations in limbo. In the end, for several of them, that was a fatal flaw. Which leads us to the fourth E, execute, the ability to get the job done. Maybe this fourth E seems obvious, but for a few years, there were just the first three E's. Thinking these traits were more than sufficient, we evaluated hundreds of people and labeled a slew of them high potentials and moved many of them into managerial roles. In that period, I traveled to personnel review sessions in the field with GE's head of human resources, Bill Conity. At the review sessions, we would refer to a single page that had each manager's photo on it, along with his or her boss's performance review and 3 circles, one for each E we were using at the time. Each one of these E's would be colored in to represent how well the individual was doing. For instance, a person could have a half a circle of energy, a full circle of energized, and a quarter circle of edge. Then one Friday night, after a week-long trip to our Midwestern businesses, Bill and I were flying back to headquarters, looking over page after page of high potentials, with 3 solidly colored-in circles. Bill turned to me. You know, Jack, we're missing something, he said. We have all these great people, but some of their results stink. What was missing was execution. It turns out you can have positive energy, energize everyone around you, make hard calls, and still not get over the finish line. Being able to execute is a special and distinct skill. It means a person knows how to put decisions into action and push them forward to completion through resistance, chaos, or unexpected obstacles. People who can execute know that winning is about results. If a candidate has the 4 E's, then you look for that final P, passion. By passion, I mean a heartfelt, deep, and authentic excitement about work. People with passion care, really care in their bones about colleagues, employees, and friends winning. They love to learn and grow, and they get a huge kick when the people around them do the same. The funny thing about people with passion, though, is they usually aren't excited just about work. They tend to be passionate about everything. They're sports trivia nuts, or they're fanatical supporters of their alma maters, or they're political junkies. Whatever, they just have juice for life in their veins. Now, sometimes you have to hire for the top jobs, and there are other characteristics to consider. The 3 preliminary asset tests and the 4E and 1P framework apply to any hiring decision, no matter what level in the organization. But sometimes you need to hire a senior level leader, someone who's going to run a major division or entire company. In that case, there are 4 more highly developed characteristics that really matter. The first characteristic is authenticity. Why? It's simple. A person cannot make hard decisions, hold unpopular positions, or stand tall for what he believes unless he knows who he is and feels comfortable with that. I am talking about self-confidence and conviction. These traits make a leader bold and decisive, which is absolutely critical in times when you must act quickly. Just as important, authenticity makes leaders likable, for lack of a better word. Their realness comes across in the way they communicate and reach people on an emotional level. Their words move them. Their message touches something inside. When I was at GE, we would occasionally encounter a very successful executive who just could not be promoted to the next level. In the early days, we would struggle with our reasoning. These executives demonstrated the right values and made the numbers, but usually their people did not connect with them. What was wrong? Finally, we figured out that these executives always had a certain phoniness to them. They pretended to be something they were not, more in control, more upbeat, more savvy than they really were. They didn't sweat. They didn't cry. They squirmed in their own skin, playing a role of their own inventing. Leaders cannot have an iota of fakeness. They have to know themselves so they can be straight with the world, energize followers, and lead with the authority born of authenticity. The second characteristic is the ability to see around corners. Every leader has to have a vision and the ability to predict the future. But good leaders must have a special capacity to anticipate the radically unexpected. In business, the best leaders in brutally competitive environments have a sixth sense for market changes, as well as moves by existing competitors and new entrants. The former vice chairman of GE, Paulo Fresco, is a gifted chess player. He carried that skill into every global business deal he made over the course of 30 years. Somehow, because of his intuition and savvy, he could put himself in the chair of the person across the table, allowing him to predict every move in a negotiation. To our amazement, Paulo always saw what was coming next. No one ever came close to getting the better of him because he knew what his adversary was thinking before the adversary himself knew. The ability to see around corners is the ability to imagine the unimaginable. The third characteristic is the strong penchant to surround themselves with people better and smarter than they are. Every time we had a crisis at GE, I would quickly assemble a group of the smartest, gutsiest people I could find at any level from within the company and sometimes from without, and lean on them heavily for their knowledge and advice. I would make sure everyone in the room came at the problem from a different angle, and then I would have us all wallow in the information as we worked to solve the crisis. These sessions were almost always contentious, and the opinions came at me strong and varied. And yet my best decisions arose from what I learned in these debates. Disagreements surfaced meaningful questions and forced us to challenge assumptions. Everyone came out of the experience more informed and better prepared to take on the next crisis. A good leader has the courage to put together a team of people who sometimes make him look like the dumbest person in the room. I know that sounds counterintuitive. You want your leader to be the smartest person in the room. But if he acts as if he is, he won't get half the pushback he must get to make the best decisions. The fourth characteristic is heavy-duty resilience. Every leader makes mistakes. Every leader stumbles and falls. The question with a senior-level leader is, does she learn from her mistakes, regroup, and then get going again with renewed speed, conviction, and confidence? The name for this trait is resilience, and it is so important that a leader must have it going into a job, because if she doesn't, a crisis time is too late to learn it. That is why when I placed people in new leadership situations, I always looked for candidates who had one or two very tough experiences. I particularly liked the people who had had the wind knocked clear out of them, but proved they could run even harder in the next race. The global business world today is going to knock any leader off her horse more than once. She must know how to get back in the saddle again. Finally, let's look at the 6 FAQs, the frequently asked questions I've received about hiring over the past several years. At the end of them, I will try, at last, to answer the insurance executive from San Diego about the one best question to ask in an interview. As I said earlier, I've been thinking about it for a long time now. 1. How do you actually interview somebody for a job? My immediate answer to this question is, don't ever rely on one meeting. No matter how pressed for time you are, or how promising someone looks, make sure every candidate is interviewed by several people. Over time, you will find there are some people in your organization who have a special gift for picking out stars and phonies. Rely on them. Bill Conity, my HR head, was a master at this. Whether it was a handshake, a smile, or a way of talking about their family, job candidates were transparent to him. And listen carefully when a trusted colleague tells you that his or her gut is negatively responding to a candidate. That uh-oh feeling is usually a sign that the candidate is not what he seems. At some point in the interview process, when it's your turn, make sure you exaggerate the challenge of the open job. Describe it on its worst day: hard, contentious, political, full of uncertainty. As you crank it up, see if the candidate keeps saying yes, yes, yes. If he does, you should worry that he has few other options, if any. You may even be his sole hope of employment. Be impressed if the candidate starts peppering you back with hard questions like, how soon do you expect the results to be achieved? Or do I have enough people to make this happen? Be even more impressed if she asks you about the company's values. The difficulty of a job will bring good candidates to the edge of their seats with curiosity and firm self-confidence, not overenthusiastic acquiescence. Finally, after all the talking is done, don't just check the references the candidate gives you. Call around. But you know that. When you do, don't allow the conversation to be perfunctory. Stop yourself from doing something natural, just hearing the good news you want to hear. Force yourself to challenge anything that sounds like lawyer speak. Use your chits. Promise you won't repeat what you hear. Doing that, you'll get what I got more times than I can count. You've got to be kidding. We were happy to get rid of that guy. The second frequently asked question. I just need to hire someone for technical expertise. Why do I need to bother with the 4 E's? Obviously, hiring a person who is both a technical star and demonstrates the 4 E's would be very nice. But if you're really just desperate for a person with a certain specialty, say a computer programmer or a research scientist, then I'd be satisfied with energy and passion, along with a bucketful of raw intelligence, great prior experience, and, of course, integrity. You need that with any person you hire. The third question, what if someone's missing 1 or 2 of the E's? Can training fill in the gaps? Any candidate you hire in a managerial role must have the first 2 E's, positive energy and the ability to energize. Those are personality traits, and I don't think they can be trained into somebody. And frankly, I would encourage you not to hire any team member, manager or not, without a good dose of positive energy. People without it just innovate an organization. Edge and execution, on the other hand, can be developed with experience and management training. Time after time, I've seen people learn how to make tough calls and deliver results. The GE audit staff offers numerous examples. Every year it brings on board about 120 people, primarily from GE's financial management training program, but about a quarter from other functions, such as engineering and manufacturing. The typical new hire in auditing has about 3 years of experience with the company. The first year, these new kids travel to GE businesses around the world as members of 3 to 6 person audit teams. After 12 weeks of grueling analysis, they return to the headquarters of the business they've just audited to present their findings to the CFO and CEO. Often, they've got plenty to tell, some of it not so pretty. Early on, these young auditors are tentative, holding their comments while the more senior members of the team run the show. But over time, usually 3 to 5 years, I've seen these auditors develop an edge that is razor sharp. It comes from observing their more experienced teammates, lots of coaching, and plenty of practice. They also develop an incredible knack for execution. After all, they're responsible for making sure their recommendations have been implemented. If they haven't, all hell breaks loose, and that's a very good teacher. The proof that edge and execution can be learned is clear. Several CEOs of GE's biggest businesses and a vice chairman are veterans of the audit staff development process. The fourth question, can a person get ahead in business without the 4 E's or passion? The answer is absolutely yes. A person can reach great heights just by being very smart, or just by the sheer ability to get things done. We can all think of examples of these individuals. Many are the inventors and entrepreneurs of the world, and usually they run their own shows. But within an organization, I just haven't seen too many have sustained success, especially as leaders, without the 4 E's and passion. The fifth question, often asked, I've always tried to hire people who can hit the ground running. What do you think about that as a decisive factor? When hiring, you have to make a trade-off. Do you hire someone to get a job done fast, or do you hire him based on his potential for growth? My advice is try to pick the second option. I didn't always feel that way. The first time I hired managers was when I was 28 years old and I needed to build a functional team. I hired a PhD who was a peer of mine to be manager of R&D. For marketing, I hired a good fellow who was smart and was there. And for manufacturing manager, my selection was an experienced hand. I'd seen him in action in another part of the same division. Although I didn't think of it at the time, most of these people had no future beyond the jobs I had just put them in. Our business was growing rapidly, and they didn't have the skills to grow with it. In fact, by the time the business was 4 years old, all of them were gone, and we were filling the positions again. With my first shot at hiring managers, I didn't know any better. I just wanted to get the job done. But I eventually learned that it pays to go for the high potentials, who can grow with the business or are capable of moving up elsewhere in the organization. Hiring a highly skilled blocker, someone who will hit the ground running but has no future beyond the open position, is tempting because it solves an immediate need. But blockers soon become enervating. They get bored by the familiarity of the work, or, as in my early case, swamped by its challenges. Their people get discouraged because they see their bosses going nowhere, which makes them wonder about their own opportunities. A good rule of thumb, then, is not to hire someone into the last job of his career, unless it's to be head of a function or CEO. The sixth and final question I often get is, how long does it take to know if you've hired right? The answer, usually within a year, and certainly within 2. It is pretty clear if someone is getting the results you'd hope for. It's relatively easy to notice when a person lacks the energy and execution you anticipated. But the ability to energize and the capacity for edge sometimes takes longer to show up in a new environment. People want to fit in before they start rousing the team to a cause or making the tough calls. But as I said, within 2 years at the most, if an employee is still falling short of your expectation, it's time to admit your mistake and start the process of moving the person out. If you've been doing your job and giving honest evaluations along the way, the employee shouldn't be surprised, and an equitable severance package will likewise soften the blow. Hiring right is hard. I'd say as a young manager, I picked the right people about half the time. 30 years later, I had improved to about 80%. My point is, don't beat yourself up if you get hiring wrong some of the time, especially when you're starting out. Situations change, people change, and you change. But just remember, every hiring mistake is yours. You have to fix it, not an HR person you call in to do your dirty work. Take responsibility and make sure the ending is candid and fair. And now for our San Diego question. What is the one thing you should ask in an interview to help you decide whom to hire? If I had just one area to probe in an interview, it would be about why the candidate left his previous job and the one before that. Was it the environment? Was it the boss? Was it the team? What exactly made you leave? There is so much information in those answers. Keep digging and dig deep. Maybe the candidate just expects too much from a job or a company. He wants a boss who is entirely hands-off or teammates who always agree. Maybe he wants too much reward, too fast. Or maybe she's leaving her last job because she has just what you want. Too much energy to be held back. So much ability to energize, she wants to manage more people. Too much edge for a namby-pamby employer. And such a strong ability to execute, she needs more challenge. The key is listen closely. Get in the candidate's skin. Why a person has left a job or jobs tells you more about them than almost any other piece of data. Your goal in hiring is to get the right players on the field. Luckily, great people are everywhere. You just have to know how to pick them. It's so easy to just hire people you like. After all, you'll be spending the majority of your waking hours with them. It's also easy to hire people with relevant experience. They'll get the job done. But friendship and experience are never enough. Every person you hire has to have integrity, intelligence, and maturity. Once you've got those, look hard for people with the 4 E's and a passion. Beyond that, at the senior level, look for authenticity, foresight, the willingness to draw on others for advice, and resilience. Put it all together, and those are the people who win. The third chapter in your company is all about people management. You've got the right players on the field. That's a great start. Now they need to work together to steadily improve their performance, be motivated, stay with the company, and grow as leaders. In other words, they need to be managed. There are libraries of books on people management, not to mention plenty of courses in business schools. There are training programs, magazines, and websites, many offering sound advice. And then there is experience. That's mainly what this chapter draws on. During my years at GE, once I was out of the laboratory of plastics, managing people was really what I did. After all, I didn't have the expertise to design jet engines, build CT scanners, or create a comedy program for NBC. Obviously, as CEO, I got involved in everything: strategy, new products, sales, M&A, and the like. But in that job, I always believed the people part was how I could help GE the most. People management covers a wide range of activities, but it really comes down to 6 fundamental practices. No person can undertake these activities alone. Far from it. So let me praise them as company-wide practices. To manage people well, companies should: 1. Elevate HR to a position of power and primacy in the organization, and make sure human resource people have the special qualities to help managers build leaders and careers. In fact, the best HR types are pastors and parents in the same package. 2. Use a rigorous, non-bureaucratic evaluation system, monitored for integrity with the same intensity as Sarbanes-Oxley Act compliance. 3. Create effective mechanisms, read money, recognition, and training, to motivate and retain. 4. Face straight into charged relationships with unions, stars, sliders, and disruptors. 5. Fight gravity, and instead of taking the middle 70% for granted, treat them like the heart and soul of the organization. 6. Design the organization chart to be as flat as possible, with blindingly clear reporting relationships and responsibilities. After being on the road for several years, I realized that some people may read these practices and wonder how, if they adopt them, they'll ever get any real work done. I always thought they were real work, but many Q&A sessions have left me with the impression that at lots of companies, people management is what's done when there's time left over. In the hope that might change, here are the practices in more detail. Practice 1. Elevating HR to a position of power in the organization. About 3 years ago, I was in Mexico City, speaking at a convention of 5,000 human resource executives. As usual, the event was set up as a Q&A session with 2 seats on the stage. In this case, the interviewer was Daniel Svici, the thoughtful, engaging CEO of Grupo Bimbo, one of the country's largest food companies. Daniel and I spent the first 45 minutes talking about strategy, about budgets, global competition, and other business topics before the microphone went into the audience for their questions. The first person to speak identified herself as the head of personnel for a Brazilian manufacturer, and with an urgent voice, asked me about the role of HR in a company. What did I think it should be? My answer was immediate, and to be honest with you, even though I had been making this point publicly for years, I thought it would get a round of applause, given the makeup of the audience. Without doubt, the head of HR should be the second most important person in any organization, I said. From the point of view of the CEO, the director of HR should be at least equal to the CFO. There was a strange hush in the place. In fact, it was so quiet, I thought my Boston accent had thrown off the translator. Isn't that what happens in your companies? I asked. Let's get a show of hands. How many of you work at companies where the CEO treats the director of HR and the CFO with equal respect? 50 hands went up. 50 out of 5,000 people. No wonder no one had clapped. I had accidentally stepped on the toes of about 99% of the crowd. Later, at a reception after the session, one person after another from the audience told me how HR was belittled and underutilized in their organizations. In all, about 30 people told me stories in the same vein. Worse, their reports turned out not to be an exception. I have asked my stature of HR question at about 75 other speaking events since Mexico City. The results are always disturbingly similar. It blows my mind. Even if your company is too small to have its own HR department, somebody's got to be doing HR. And HR just has to be as important as any other function in a company. In fact, why wouldn't HR be as important as finance? After all, if you manage a baseball team, would you listen more closely to the team accountant or the director of player personnel? The input of the team accountant matters. He sure knows how much they can pay a player. But his input certainly doesn't count more than the input from the director of player personnel, who knows just how good each player is. Both belong alongside the CEO at the table where decisions are made. Unfortunately, at a lot of companies, HR isn't even in the same room. The reasons, I think, are threefold. First, the impact of HR is hard to quantify. You can see how sales and R&D affect performance and how finance tallies it up. But HR deals with air, people skills. Not only are people skills squishy soft, most people assume they have them in spades. How many times have you heard someone say, "I'm a people person"? Second, HR too often gets relegated or pushed into a benefits trap, administering insurance plans and overseeing scheduling issues like vacation and flex time. It also gets saddled with health and happiness activities, putting out the planned newspaper and organizing the summer picnic. Someone has to take care of these tasks, but if HR gets stuck doing them all the time, its stature will never be what it should. Third, HR becomes twisted up in palace intrigue. Back in the 60s and early 70s, GE went through a period like that. Its HR system ran on gossip, whispers, and tattling. A small and frankly terrifying group of HR executives held secretive opinions about every manager, and they could tie you for life if they wanted. On the other hand, they could also move you up very quickly. They thought of themselves as kingmakers. The game changed completely when Reg Jones, the CEO at the time, appointed Ted Levino to run HR. Ted threw open the shutters and let the light shine in. HR processes soon became transparent, and more importantly, they began to make sense. By the time Ted retired in 1985, HR was on its way to doing exactly what it should be: listening to people vent, brokering internal differences, and helping managers develop leaders and build careers. That's why the best HR people are a kind of hybrid. One part pastor, who hears all sins and complaints without recrimination, and one part parent, who loves and nurtures, but gives it to you fast and straight when you're off track. I've found over the years that the best pastor-parent types have usually run something once in their careers: a factory, a product line, or another function. But I've also seen some come right up through HR. Either way, the best have stature beyond their rank and title. They know the business, its every detail. They understand the tensions between marketing and manufacturing, or between two executives who once went after the same job. They see the hidden hierarchies in people's minds, the invisible org chart of political connections that exists in every company. They know the players and the history. Along with stature, pastor-parent types have got integrity oozing out of them. That integrity comes from unrelenting candor and trustworthiness. Pastor-parents listen with uncommon care, tell the truth, and hold confidences tight. They also know how to settle a disagreement. We'd all like to believe that good companies don't need referees, but they do. People get passed over for promotions. Interdivisional sales cause all kinds of who gets the credit issues. Bonus pools are perceived to be unfairly distributed. I was lucky enough to have a few pastor-parent types on my team at various points in my career, the last one being Bill Conity, who I've mentioned before in this book. Bill started out in GE's manufacturing training program and eventually became the manager of the locomotive diesel engine plant in Grove City, Pennsylvania. He then jumped ship to the HR business. He was a natural. No matter whom he was dealing with, a senior executive or an hourly worker, he was as straight as could be with good news and bad. He was a great listener and so discreet that you couldn't squeeze a secret out of him with a vise. I came to appreciate Bill when he was head of HR for aircraft engines. The business had a huge crisis in '89 when it was discovered that one of its employees had bribed an Israeli Air Force general to get a jet engine contract. What impressed me was how Bill dealt with the people involved in the mess, some of whom were his peers and friends. He had to make incredibly painful recommendations about letting people go, and he did it with the kind of candor, compassion, and diplomacy that is the ultimate hallmark of a pastor parent. If your HR is on track, pastor parents are ready to handle frictions and crises, channeling anger, forging compromises, and if need be, negotiating dignified endings. They are there to help managers manage people well. Practice number 2, use a rigorous, non-bureaucratic evaluation system, monitoring for integrity with the same intensity as Sarbanes-Oxley Act compliance. Remember what happened when corporate scandals rocked the American economy? The government reacted quickly by passing the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which mandates a fine or jail time, or both, for any CEO or CFO who wittingly signs off on bad numbers. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act was necessary to get credibility in financial reporting and restore investor confidence. I just wish that evaluation systems got the same kind of attention and rigor. After all, financial violations happen because of people. Yet people evaluation systems are too often just exercises in paper pushing. Earlier in this book, in the chapter on candor, I mentioned that I often ask audiences, how many of you have received an honest, straight between the eyes feedback session in the past year, where you came out knowing exactly what you have to do to improve and where you stand in the organization? To repeat, 20% of the audience raises its hand on a good day, but an average yes response is about 10%. If this unscientific research is anywhere near right, very few companies have meaningful evaluation systems in place. That's not just bad, it's terrible. You simply cannot manage people to better performance if you do not give candid, consistent feedback through a system that is loaded with integrity. There is no one right way to evaluate people. Every company will devise different forms and different methodologies. But any good evaluation system should share some characteristics. It should be clear and simple, washed clean of time-consuming, bureaucratic gobbledygook. If your evaluation system involves more than 2 pages of paperwork per person, something is wrong. I evaluated my 20 or so direct reports with frequent handwritten notes that included 2 pieces of information: what I thought the person did well and how I thought they could improve. A good system should measure people on relevant, agreed-upon criteria that relate directly to an individual's performance. The criteria should be quantitative, based on how people deliver on certain goals, and qualitative, based on how they deliver on desired behaviors. A good system should also ensure that managers evaluate their people at least once a year, and preferably twice, in formal face-to-face sessions. Informal appraisals should happen all the time. But when it comes to formal reviews, one of the face-to-face sessions should let people know where they stand in relation to others. If your company practices differentiation, a good evaluation system is where the rubber meets the road. Finally, a good evaluation system should include a professional development component. Managers should not only talk to their employees about next career steps, but should elicit from them the names of the 2 or 3 people who they think could replace them should they be promoted. Even with all these characteristics, no evaluation system is first-rate unless it is constantly monitored for integrity. Someone has to have the responsibility and the accountability to ask if the evaluation system is capturing the truth, just as a good audit team does with the numbers. Does the evaluation system really measure company values? Or does it just measure financial results? Does it get implemented with sincerity? Or do people blow it off as a waste of time? Do people really learn at the end of the evaluation what they must do to improve their performance? Only integrity can keep evaluation systems from becoming paper pushing. And since there is no law to make it happen, and no audit team either, it's up to every boss giving an evaluation with the vigorous support of HR to take this responsibility upon himself or herself. You won't get thrown in jail if you don't, but do it anyway, because it'll make you and your team better. Practice 3. Create effective mechanisms. Read money, recognition, and training to motivate and retain. I'll never forget the time I was at a meeting about how GE should reward the winner of the Steinmetz Award, given annually to the company's best scientists. I was a group VP at the time, and so my ears really perked up when one of the vice chairmen, a guy with a lot of stature and a lot of dough, registered his opinion. These people don't want money, he said. They want recognition. He must have forgotten where he came from. Of course people want to be recognized for great performance. Plaques and public fanfare have their place. But without money, they lose a lot of their impact. Even the Nobel and Pulitzer Prizes come with cash awards. If your company is managing people well, it tightly aligns good performance with rewards. The better you do, the more you get, and you get it in both the soul and the wallet. There is hardly anything more frustrating than working hard, meeting or exceeding expectations, and discovering that it doesn't matter to your company. You get nothing special, or you get what everyone else does. People need to get differentiated rewards and recognition to be motivated, and companies need to deliver both for retention. It's that simple. Take the case of a woman I know who graduated with a degree in theater design from an Ivy League college and eagerly went to work as a buyer at a prestigious New York City retailer. Despite the grueling hours and low pay, this woman showed immediate promise. Her selections for the sportswear department broke sales records for 6 straight quarters, and she managed to repair the store's relationships with 2 disgruntled vendors. Although it was not part of the job, and other buyers teased her for doing it, she worked the floor and the cash register to better understand her department's customers. For 2 years, this buyer got very little public recognition for her success. That was bad enough, but her bonus was also standard, exactly what the company described as average during the interview process. She had to quit to find out how much she was valued. When she handed in her resignation, her boss was shocked. "But why are you leaving?" she asked. "You have a great future here." "It's so draining. No one ever tells me I'm doing a good job." "Well, no one ever tells me I'm doing a good job," her boss shot back. "That's just the way it goes here. You've got to get a thick skin." Now, retail is a notoriously tough working environment, but the practice of not rewarding performance is commonplace in plenty of industries, and one of the main reasons good people leave. A winning company just does not let good people walk out the door for lack of recognition, financial or otherwise. Another key way to motivate and retain is through training. If you've hired the right people, they will want to grow. They'll be bursting with the desire to learn and do more. A good machinist will want to know how to operate more machines and eventually how to run the shop. A good manufacturing engineer will want to travel to Japan to visit companies using advanced techniques that he has only read about. A good PR person will want to learn how to communicate more effectively on the web. Good people never think they have reached the top of their game, but they're dying to get there. A company that manages people well helps make that happen. If it can afford it, it has in-house training led by its own executives, who serve not only as teachers, but as role models. A company with fewer resources can facilitate training outside at any number of good programs. In either case, the company makes sure that training is seen as a reward for performance, not a sop for time served. Companies cannot promise their people lifetime employment. Global competition is too fierce and economic cycles too frequent for any such guarantees. But they can promise to give their people every chance for employability, skills that will make them more attractive if they are forced to part ways. Like rewards and recognition, training does that. It motivates people by showing them a way to grow, that the company cares, and that they have a future. If you are doing it right, they will want to make that future with you. Practice 4. Face straight into charge relationships with unions, your stars, sliders, and your disruptors. Like families, companies have relationships filled with history or fraught with tension. But managing people well means paying a special attention to these hard relationships, not just letting them fester or float into neglect, approaches that are entirely human but often end in a mess. Good people management requires companies to confront their charged relationships with candor and action. Let's start with unions. When I was at GE, it was well known that I was not a fan of unions. I thought they created conditions that made the company less competitive, and they drove an unnecessary wedge between management and employees. I use the word unnecessary because in my experience, unions arise only when a plant or an office is being managed by someone who is abusive, remote, or indifferent, and whose actions have taken away the voice and dignity of employees. Without a doubt, that boss needs to be reformed or removed because unionization is an excessive response with negative long-term consequences, really for everyone. We did have several long-time unions at GE during my time as CEO. I always felt our relationship was candid and respectful, and we never had a national strike. I can think of 2 reasons why. First, we always stated our principles and stuck to them. And second, we never started our relationship at the negotiating table. Principles first. The most important thing to remember about unions is that they are made up of your own people. You work together, reside in the same towns, and oftentimes your kids go to school or play together. Your lives and futures are intertwined. That is why all you have with unions is your integrity, your word. You can fight about issues, and you will. But your fighting will be more productive if you're always clear about what issues are negotiable and which are untouchable. During negotiations, waffle only on those matters you identified as negotiable and nothing else. Otherwise, your word will be meaningless and your relationship will be without trust. Now to the negotiating table. Make every effort not to have your first date there. A war zone is no place to get acquainted. Almost every time I traveled to the businesses with Bill Conity, we met with local union representatives. These sessions were mainly to get to know one another better and lay out positions without any immediate agenda. Everyone would get a chance to talk, and even better, in these settings, we were all more inclined to listen. Bill and I always learned a lot, and it served Bill and the company well in every national negotiation. Let's look at another charged relationship to manage, with stars. One thing is certain, you need stars to win. And I have always advocated identifying your stars, that top 20%, and stroking and rewarding them in an outsized way. But stroking can backfire. A star's ego can be a dangerous thing. I've seen talented young people promoted too quickly and their ambitions spin out of control. I've seen terrific financial analysts, engineers, and network executives get told once too many times that they are irreplaceable, and they start swaggering around to the point that their teams resent them. I've seen smart, capable individuals come to believe they are so indispensable they should not be bound by anything, including the company's values. Stars can become monsters if you let them. That's why someone has to be on the lookout, namely the star's boss, with support from HR if you have it. This job cannot fall through the cracks. The minute a star seems to be getting arrogant or out of control, someone has to call the person in to have a candid conversation about values and behaviors. You can never be afraid of your stars. They can't hold a company hostage. Now, sometimes stars surprise you and up and leave. That can be a defining moment. Ideally, the star will be replaced within 8 hours. That's right, 8 hours. This immediate reaction sends the message to the organization that no one is indispensable. It shouts out that no one single individual is bigger than the company. One morning in the summer of 2001, just as Jeff Immel was about to take over as CEO, Larry Johnson, who was CEO of our appliances business, came to headquarters to tell us he was taking the job as CEO of Albertsons, the large West Coast food and drug chain. Larry was a big presence in GE, with a strong track record and a great reputation. Even though the announcement of his departure knocked the wind out of us, we moved quickly. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, we appointed Jim Campbell, the sales manager in appliances, to Larry's job. Albertsons got a great CEO, and we never missed a beat. Jim was off and running from day one. The only way to be able to replace a star swiftly is to have a slate of people ready to do so. That's where good evaluation systems come in particular, career development planning. That process can surface 1 or 2 in-house candidates to replace any star who departs. Just don't wait until the star leaves to start the replacement process. By then, it's too late to make the point. A third complicated relationship is with what I call sliders. These are employees who were once good performers but have hit a wall for some reason or another, ranging from a midlife crisis to a job-related disappointment. A slider, while generally well-liked, now just shows up at work and goes through the motions. In most cases, no one knows what to do about it. In fact, the situation is usually so awkward, people look away. You can't. Sliders need to be re-energized, either with new jobs or training. Otherwise, they fossilize in their jobs and often grow bitter, slowly but surely infecting their groups with disaffection. Often, managers take a long time to let these individuals go because their previous accomplishments were more than acceptable. But a company that manages people well quickly moves to get its sliders back in the game, and if that doesn't work, tells them the game is over. The final relationship that cannot be ignored is with disruptors. These are the individuals who cause trouble for sport, inciting opposition to management for a variety of reasons, most of them petty. Usually these people have good performance. That's their cover, and so they are endured or appeased. A company that manages people well takes disruptors head on. First, they give them very tough evaluations, naming their bad behavior and demanding it change. Usually, it won't. Disruptors are a personality type. If that's the case, get them out of the way of people trying to do their jobs. They're poison. Practice 5. Fight gravity, and instead of taking the middle 70% for granted, treat them like the heart and soul of the organization. As practice 4 would suggest, managers end up spending the vast majority of their people management energy on charged relationships, too often trying to salvage sliders or disruptives. That's natural, but it's a mistake. Most work in an organization gets done by the people in the middle 70, those solid performers who don't quite shine but work hard and well, and perhaps could shine with enough care and attention. You just can't allow the middle 70 to toil away in a form of obscurity, like a well-behaved, mild-mannered middle child in a family of attention-grabbing prodigies and troublemakers. Well-managed companies fight that bull. In fact, they make sure managers spend at least half of their people time on their biggest constituency, evaluating and coaching them. Further, they don't forget the middle 70 when it comes to rewards, recognition, and training. One important note, in larger companies, the middle 70 can be a highly differentiated group. In a way, it has its own top 20, valuable middle, and bottom 10%. You need to recognize those performance variations. You can be sure the employees do. In fact, a common and damaging dynamic is the departure of the best performers in the middle 70. Some of these individuals are almost stars. Their performance is that close. But when they get lumped with the middle 70 and are not managed attentively, they leave in frustration for a company where they will be more appreciated. That's a real loss. Future stars are often very hard at work, quietly in the middle 70. A good company recognizes that and makes it clear that this ranking is just a snapshot in time. It encourages this group, using every tool in its people management kit. The point is, the middle 70 matters a lot. It is the heart and soul, the central core of any company. If you're going to manage people well, you simply cannot forget the majority of them. Practice number 6, design the organization chart to be as flat as possible, with blindingly clear reporting relationships and responsibilities. In 2004, Clayton Dubilier and Rice purchased Culligan International, the water treatment and supply business with about $700 million in annual sales and about 5,000 employees spread across 13 countries. One of CD&R's partners, George Tamke, the former co-CEO of Emerson Electric, was named chairman. George was well aware that Culligan had been through 10 owners in the previous 15 years, but he couldn't believe the organizational disarray that hit him when he walked through the door. George found that many employees simply didn't know where they fit in, whom they reported to, who reported to them, and what results each person was responsible for. George had had the luxury of starting the business for 90 days prior to CD&R's closing the deal, so he had a clear idea of how Culligan should be organized. Within 30 days, George and Culligan's relatively new CEO, Mike Kochmer, had designed and implemented a new org chart that eliminated any confusion. It's too early to talk about the impact of this change on Culligan's bottom line, but based on my all-too-frequent GE experience clearing up confusing and otherwise ambiguous structures, it will be significant. Culligan's situation, unfortunately, is not unique to old, established multinationals. Just recently, I spoke with Dara Khosrowshahi, the new CEO at the online travel company Expedia. Dara also walked into an org chart quagmire when he arrived on the job at the end of 2004. Expedia, less than 10 years old and highly entrepreneurial, had been growing so fast no one had taken the time to clarify reporting roles and responsibilities. As his first priority, Dara set out to fix that. My goal here is not to describe how to come up with the perfect org chart. Each company will do that differently based on its size and the business it's in. But some principles apply across the board. If you want to manage people effectively, help them by making sure the org chart leaves as little as possible to the imagination. It should paint a crystal clear picture of reporting relationships and make it patently obvious who is responsible for what results. Just as important, it should be flat. Look, every layer in an organization puts spin on a new initiative or organizational event. It's like that children's whispering game, telephone. Every time a piece of information travels through another person, it changes. Layers do that too, adding interpretation and buzz as information travels up and down the ladder. The trick then is to have fewer rungs. Layers have other vices. They add cost and complexity to everything. They slow things down because they increase the number of approvals and meetings required for anything to move forward. They have an odious way of burying new businesses or small units in big companies in honeycombs of bureaucracy. They tend to make little generals out of perfectly normal people who find themselves in hierarchies that respond only to rank. The awfulness of layers is nothing new to anyone, and yet companies gravitate toward them. For some, layers feel like the only way to respond to growth. More sales? Quick, add more district managers in the field. More employees? Quick, add more staff at headquarters. For others, the reasoning's even worse. Layers are a way to give people the feeling of growth when there is none. Layers allow you to give employees promotions instead of raises. That's better than doing nothing, right? Wrong. The inexorable pull towards layers is why I suggest you make your company 50% flatter than you'd normally feel comfortable with. Managers should have 10 direct reports at the minimum and 30 to 50% more if they're experienced. When you've got great players, you'll get the most out of them if their reporting relationship and responsibilities are blindingly clear. Your organization chart is not the only way to accomplish that, but it's a necessary first step. Now, after you've hired great people, your job becomes managing them into a winning team. To do that, make HR matter, with a cadre of pastor-parent types at the helm. Ensure people really know how they're doing, with evaluation systems that are honest and real. Motivate and retain wisely with money, recognition, and training. Face into charged relationships without flinching. Pay ample attention to your largest constituency, the middle 70%. And finally, get that organization chart flattened and straightened out. These 6 practices take time. That's true. But companies are not buildings, machines, or technologies. They are people. Besides managing them, what work matters more?